Red light's on. Thank you, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's Promoting a Sustainable Easton PACE meeting. Today is February 12th, Wednesday. Had to look. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll just go around the list, and those members that are here, if they could just say their name and present for a roll call, that would be great. Start with you.
Present.
Chris Cohn, present.
Andrea Sarjewski, present.
Wendy Nightingale, present.
Marissa Souza, present.
Kathy Millett, present.
Nancy Donahue, present.
Tom Broussard, present.
Jim Hamilton, present.
Connor Reed, present.
Chris Mills, present.
Denise Higgins, present.
Dottie Fulgenetti, present.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As always, our meetings are hybrid, which means that attendance both in person and remote via Zoom counts as quorum. We obviously have plenty. Chris, thank you as always for coming. Let the record show that Jen Starr just arrived. Welcome, Jen. You're a full-fledged voting member, Chris. Appreciate you joining every meeting. Any ways to share your thoughts and always sharing your vote as well.
My pleasure.
So team, really excited to be here tonight. I think that we're really reaching a critical mass for those of you in town. I'm sure you probably received your mailer. Hopefully you did. It was kind of like Christmas for me, getting it out of the mailbox, like it was a letter from Santa maybe, or something like that. But just wanted to say thank you so much to Connor, Sean, to the team at the town, and for all the people that contributed. I know Jocelyn did. I was remiss in my email. I think Denise, you had a lot of feedback too. So just know if I missed anybody. I think, Kathy, did you have feedback?
Not as much as.
Anywho, all you guys, thank you for getting that out, because there's no question that the amount of engagement in the community is ratcheting up. That's just another layer on. I had 3, I would call them influencers in town, people who know a lot of folks, reach out over the weekend and ask for a cup of coffee out of the blue, which was great. So that's how you know we're starting to penetrate the noise, become relevant. We have people attending tonight, which is great. So that's another good sign. And thank you for coming, honestly. Well said. So tonight we have, I think, some important things. Hopefully they don't take as long as some prior meetings, but we'll approve minutes. We do need to talk about just stakeholder and community engagement. So thank you all so much for replying to us about what you can and can't do, what you're comfortable with and not. I think I even noticed today that there was a notice that went out in Parent Square. Do I have it right? Love it. It was great to see information about PACE, so thank you folks so much. We have a discussion about the open house, which is going to probably take up some time. Like, how do we make the 26th really impactful and valuable? I would expect a pretty big turnout by the number of calls I've been receiving. And then just what's the calendar look like for us? So how do we get to the finish line? When is the finish line? And the deliverables for all that good stuff. The last thing is just to revisit last week's votes to give everybody, because we sent off the models that people could play with, the financial model. So just in case you wanted to do scenario planning, I do want to just go around again and afford people the ability to adjust based upon having access to that tool. And then that way we'll just feel comfortable as we go into February 26th that what we are conveying really represents the average response of the committee. So with that, if there are no issues with the minutes dated November 20th and December 11th of 2024, I would take a motion to accept.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
That's Fulgenetti and Starr. All those in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous, which is excellent. And there is no voting member online, right, Dottie? Just want to make sure before I say unanimous.
Nope, not that I can tell.
Perfect. Next up, item 2, PACE committee member updates on stakeholder and community engagement.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I'll take that. Everyone on the committee, in receiving the email with the agenda, has a list of all the things that we've asked people to engage in. But I want to say the things again that we're planning for the audience and for folks here. And I also want to mention the things that have happened to date. And then what I'm going to really ask you for is to give Tom and I some help, and folks who have already engaged, to sort of spearhead these things. So if you said you're willing to do something at a store, like a grocery store, could you make a contact with the store and kind of set up a time to do a table? So first of all, we ask folks to consider hosting a meet and greet at your house. staffing a table at a store, visiting seniors at places such as Frothingham Hall, library table, knocking on doors, holding signs, attending breakfast info sessions, maybe doing something at the YMCA or the Chamber of Commerce, or messaging town organizations yourself or asking us to speak at those organizations. So those are some of the things that we've asked people to sign up for, and people have come back to say their availability. It was never intended that you have to do all of those things. So we appreciate that people were discerning, and some people were very, thoughtful and like, I will help as needed, but their commitments are definitely stretched. I understand that. Some things that have happened to date. I had an opportunity to go in at Principal Kelly Kavanaugh's invitation and speak to some teachers at the high school. Tom and I also spoke with some town union leadership, thanks to Chris, who helped coordinate that. And Chris also had a listening session with some of his union as well, so we appreciate that. Tom and I filmed some short ECAT session, about 20 minutes, so maybe a lot better segment for folks to watch. That we will do more of those as things progress, but that's out there and available. And Tom and I also had a chance to talk to over 60 educators, about 65 educators set up for us by the union leadership online. So that was a really good conversation as well. Wendy and I also today had an opportunity to talk with Envision Easton, which is a group that's working on the master plan. Really important to kind of dovetail and share those projects, because we're asking voters to engage with both of us, and we need to be clear about what we're doing. And as you just mentioned, Parent Square notice going out. Thank you for that, to get that. So looking at our engagement here that folks have agreed to do. Is there anybody a couple of people, and most people said, I'm happy to do this, but I'd like a partner. I think partners are a good idea to do all these things. We shouldn't be doing them alone. 2 or 3 people who'd be willing to set up some store visits. Is there anybody who said that they might do that they'd be willing to go into a store? Jen, thank you. Marissa? Okay, and if you feel like, thank you very much, Jim, at a later time, you can text me, email me if you want to add your name to that. Holding signs, we have a few people to do that. I think I'm going to hold off on that. Gathering at homes. A couple people said possibility. They're thinking about that. I guess what I would ask is, if you feel the timing is right and you want to do it, just let Tom and I know, because we'll certainly attend if you like, unless you prefer to make it something that you just do, or if there's someone else on the committee. Let us know if you'd like some backup on that, some support on that, and we'll come back to that. Senior engagement. Chris, you said that would be something you'd really be interested in doing, if I remember correctly, right?
That's true.
Where do you think you would like to do that? Frothingham?
Well, you mentioned Frothingham.
Yeah,
I used to be on the board of the Friends of Frothingham.
great. I don't know if Elise Circle would allow someone in for a speaker. I think they still have a community room there.
Right.
They used to. Would you, and again, if somebody else, like to join Chris and kind of speak with the seniors? Thank you, Jim. Thank you. That's awesome. Anybody else?
If you needed, kind of school representation, and if you were meeting during the day, I could do that, so that our school colleagues don't have to take time away from work.
Okay.
Okay. Present to your organizations. Is there anybody else who can think of another organization that could benefit from hearing from?
I did drop off a flyer at my daycare, so
Thank
they have
you.
it on the door when you walk in. So any parents that are
Thank you.
Nice.
That's
residents,
very
they'll see it when
helpful.
they walk in.
Yeah, simple things like that too. I guess we can do a posting at the post office and things like that. Thank you. At the schools, things. Anybody else? Any organizations?
I
Chris?
can, I'm on the Y board, so I could cover that.
The Y?
Yeah.
Oh, super,
that's-
Chris. That's
and if-
great.
I could probably connect with the chamber too, if nobody else wanted to.
Would anybody like to do those things with Chris? Yeah. Denise, what kind of, he makes the entree and sets up some dates. Somebody else on this?
Well, I said that anybody that wants somebody to accompany them, I'd be happy to accompany anybody who has something they want to do.
Thank you. So if anybody finds you get to that night and you just need another partner, give Chris a shout out too. And as well as us too, let us know. And if we're available, we're just, running thin on some PACE meetings these days. So, okay. Did I miss a?
And just per my email that I wrote, I can try, especially in evenings. I can attend anything that anybody would like me to attend to speak specifically about school issues if there are specific questions about schools.
Thank you.
And I can try to move things around during the day as well. I can't, we're limited in some of the things we can do, but anything we're invited to, I can go and provide factual information, and I'm more than happy to do that.
Terrific. So if you feel that you're going to host something at your home and there's going to be a lot of young parents there or something, Jen has mentioned, Leisha has mentioned, please invite them. And if their schedule permits, they'll do that.
I apologize if this is a dumb question.
I'm sure it's not.
When we start meeting, are we going to have a definitive consensus and plan as to how we're moving forward? That
Well,
was
I
some
guess
of the feedback that I actually got over the past couple of weeks when I said, oh, maybe we'll do this. Well, do you guys know what you're going to do yet? So
if that's important to you, you might want to wait just a few weeks, right? We're saying
I'm
sort of.
asking you, like,
Yes. I guess it's your sense of things. If your constituents are saying, I just want to know what's going on, but they may, if they're starting to look for proposed solutions, then I would just wait a couple of weeks. We're saying that.
I would feel more comfortable with the solution, and here's why, explaining it rather than just
other way.
explaining the why. That's just me.
That makes a lot of sense.
But I don't want to go against the grain.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Short term, some of it is to make sure, like, we want to be at Shaw's so that when 300 people come through that Saturday, they're hearing come to February 26th, right? And then they get access to all the leaders and get info. The meet and greets at home, so I agree. I think it runs the gamut. Like, some people have already called and said, well, all right, we know the average is $6.4 million override and 1.5 expense. Like, that's enough for me to get fired up and engage. So some people have called me and, like, they're fired up. They're like, why all the normal questions, which is great. And I appreciated the enthusiasm. Some of it I'm not sure was enthusiasm, but that's what I'm calling it. But that's engagement, which is priceless, right? So yeah, I think, Chris, that defers to you as to where your audience might be. You might have been keeping them in loop, but like, I've got people that are calling with very general, like, questions we've probably known the answer to for a while, and they're now starting their educational journey, which is great. Dottie?
Can I just add, if people, it looks like we have a good audience here. Hopefully people are watching at home. The select board got 3 emails this week, definitely strongly supporting an override. I just want to remind people that they can send us emails. They can send them to you. They can send them to the select board, the school committee, all of the above, copy everybody, we read those and we respond to them. And if enough people, in your community group or people online or whatever, if you have a group of people and you want us to come and talk, reach out to us and let us know, because that would be the best way to do it rather than speculation.
Thank you. That's excellent.
Easton PASE 2024 at gmail.com, so that everybody knows. But we were receiving emails to that account last week as well.
Good.
So just to Chris's point, I believe to Dr. Cabral's, that employees have certain things we need to be very thoughtful and careful of, that not crossing into what somebody could construe as political advocacy. But that's always kind of strange when like I'm putting a budget forward that's going to be right? But one of the things that I had offered to Nancy and to Tom, and some other communities have done this, and I could do some of these starting in March, just because we have night meetings every week until March. But having just general open office hours with me about the budget. Some here, some at Framingham Hall. Certainly welcome a couple PACE people to hang out with me while I do that. But I'm willing to put some of those on throughout the spring, because I know that this format's not always the easiest, because these are very long. I know a select board presentation can be pretty long, so I'm happy to do something like that.
Appreciate
if anyone on PACE wants to volunteer to join me.
Yeah,
that's great.
Context, just a little bit more for Chris's comments. I think it's helpful. I would expect, and we're going to get into timing, but we probably will not know like what the actual budget and therefore the reductions would be until we get much closer to town meeting, right? Like, that's what they're working on now, and they're going through a lot of that confidentially for all the right reasons. The same thing on the override, that factors in after we come to a final agreement as a team, which I think tonight we're going to have our final draft, and then we go to the open house on the 26th. We get feedback and a lot of discussion with the community. Then we immediately follow up as a body and we firm up, here's our recommendation. And So that's kind of the last piece, and that would be first week of March. We have our charge to make sure we deliver by the end of March. So it really works out timing-wise. But I don't know where I'm going with it is I think that we can confidently say we're looking to create relative level service funding, that the funds are being utilized in large chunks, $2 million associated with insurance increase year over year. So there's some meat on the bone to have a conversation. I haven't found people like lacking for specificity. I'm not sure we'll know like the exact allocation of an override until we get way past the time frame for that. The other thing I would say is as you go through these things, did you have more that you wanted
Yes,
to do?
I do, but
Okay.
you don't want to?
Yeah, go for it.
And the other thing I want to say is, so if you're the people who are approaching the stores, that doesn't mean you're the only people who have to speak to them. You're sort of setting up the dates and then let the committee know, and everybody else will come who can come and share some of those hours with you. So don't feel like you're alone in it, but we don't need to all run into the same shaws and say, may I have a table in your front. The library, Patrick Helen and I will set some things up, and again, a lot of people showed interest in that, so we'll invite you so you can join us. Knocking on doors, I think, again, we'll table that for now. As we get closer, we'll decide when we're going to do that. Breakfast sessions, I can envision these being sort of once a week, either at a Dunkin' Donut or the Beanery, maybe after school for teachers, in the morning for business people. Would anybody just maybe start to put together a schedule for that?
I'll do
Again,
that.
Yeah, okay, thank you, because you have some experience doing that, too.
Yep, so it'll be Friday mornings, most likely. It'll be 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. Probably start at the Beanery and then go to Dunk's just to switch it up. But usually it's better if it's at one place, give or take. And then, yeah, it's just coffee with Pace. And
Okay.
you put up a 8.5 by 11 sign, and whoever wants to sit down. We already have one person who wants to come see us, which is great.
Yeah. So you don't even have to get permission for that, right? That's
I usually go in and I'll
kinda-
say, "Do you mind?" Just want to make sure. But
Right.
it's not really political. It's informational, and they were very kind previously when they did it. I think they were appreciative that the community was gathering there to share information and try to educate people.
Very good. And I think that is the list. So
Awesome.
just some things to get started on, keep us all apprised, ask for help. You're not in this alone, and when you get some dates, put those out and people will help you. But thank you. This is what our task is going to be over the next couple months, so.
Cool. It's the fun part. The one thing I want to say for all you Ted Lasso fans, and I will say it on the 26th, is honestly encourage curiosity and make sure that you are accepting of judgment and reposition it as curiosity. So I really have friends who called in a very animated way, and I appreciate it. Not only did it challenge me and my understanding of the conversation, but it really helped me reorient that, like, I hear and feel the real concern and frustration, and it's valid. And the more we got into the curious side, the better conversation it was, and the more ownership was shared about the solution. Because I think a lot of people will, when you're engaging with them, if you haven't done this before, so when you door knock and you get told, like, you're the worst thing that's ever happened and you're dead wrong, and like you learn the thick skin of a salesperson, I guess. But oftentimes if you find a way to engage the curiosity, those people really appreciate that. You might not still agree. So just don't feel bad if people are frustrated with you. It's not you, it's probably the situation. And be ready for it, because I know at first it caught me by surprise, and it was hard because I took it personal, but it's not. And the more you kind of get comfortable with the curious side, you can help people really become part of the solution. And I'll say that on the 26th too, as well, so that the audience just knows that there are a lot of people that care passionately about their jobs, that they work hard every day for us as residents, and they're in this room, and we're all working together to try to solve this challenge, as we are. You guys know that. Next up is the reviewing of the committee deliverables calendar and budget milestones through July 2025. So
Tom,
Connor,
How do you want to handle Zoom questions if someone raises their hand? Do you want them to put the question in the Q&A, or?
yeah, that would be great. Yep, if it could go in the Q&A, that would be awesome. So that way you can see it and you can probably slot it in appropriately. So for example, if the comment is, when will you be at the coffee shop? We can handle that one now. Do you have any questions?
And then Dottie, just as we would at your meeting, for anyone who's joining a hybrid meeting for the first time, that we need your name and address for the minutes of the meeting with your question.
So one thing to add is that we do need the name and the street address for the minutes.
We do.
We didn't say that earlier specifically, so I'm just going to read this question instead of let it sit there.
That's okay.
If enough people send emails strenuously protesting an override, will it matter? Or will it come down to what the select board wants regardless of public outcry? Does my voice matter?
Got it. So as a PACE committee, we value all voices and feedback, and I know that all the committees and boards in town do. So I encourage you to send how you feel about the issue. I would just separate out that we're not the select board, so how they handle our recommendation is completely separate from the PACE committee's recommendation. And I think you all know that. There's a mechanics that literally is governed by town charter. PACE is designed to provide a recommendation, a forum for information exchange, and that we cannot put the warrant article of an override on. And just similarly, we can't define what the budget article will be. That's not our purview. So we welcome the feedback. As stated, we've received emails that support it. I have received feedback, and it looks like we'll get an email that don't. But I would just ask the public, the more information you can give us about why you don't, helps us to make a more informed recommendation. So appreciate that question.
And also, Tom, just to clarify, the select board, we would vote to either put this on the town meeting warrant and call an election. That's the vote that the select board would take, either to do that or not do that. So ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever happens is in the hands of the voters.
Well said. Was that the only question?
Yeah, I think
Awesome. It was great getting our first question. Breaking boundaries tonight. We have people attending, people asking questions online. Watch out. Okay. Timeline. Connor, is it okay if I lean on you just a touch? But I think I alluded to it. So rough timeline for the machinery of how this all works and comes together. And I'm not an expert, so I will quickly duck out. But from a PACE committee, we have really, Nancy hit the nail on the head. We have a few week sprint where engagement's going to be high. It's going to be great. People are talking about it. There's a buzz. They're calling, texting. The mailers landed, which is awesome. Facebook seems to be picking up. I do want to say thanks to the EEA. They posted about tonight's meeting, which is great. They enabled us to meet with the stakeholders, which is great. So we meet tonight. We have the 26th, which is a pretty big opportunity with an open house. I would expect we'll be back maybe the following week, very quickly thereafter, to just firm up our opinion. Did anything change from the open house, our attitude? And then we're going to come with, everybody's going to vote their final recommendation. And then we'll take the average, and chances are good as a committee, that's what we will vote as a final recommendation. I'm happy to take other methods to do it, but with 19 potential voices to be heard, straight up average seems to be good. Now, the good news is, if you all looked at the feedback, it's very close. So I give credit to all of you for working together with the same information. So that's good news. So then we will have to spend a couple weeks to get to, I think it's March 24th is a select board meeting, if I remember correctly. So roughly that would get us before our March 31st charge, which is great. And then after that, I will let somebody else talk about, like Connor, about what the rest of that calendar looks like, what the warrant looks like, the town meeting, if there is an override proposal, what the timing of that looks like as well.
Sure, thanks, Tom. I just want to reiterate what Dottie said, which is, the feedback from that resident. The board can put questions in front of the voters, but they cannot unilaterally decide these things. None of us can. I cannot. The superintendent cannot. And there's going to be a lot of questions, and we're getting them now, about process, the budget calendar, kind of roles and responsibilities, and where that intersects with what PACE is doing. So under the town's charter, which if you're not like a municipal finance nerd, that's basically like the town's constitution. It gets adopted by voters at town meeting. Ours, I think, was most recently adopted in the 70s, and it gets ratified in the state legislature. It lays out the some specific calendar requirements for the operating budget. And under the charter, the town administrator has to put a budget draft out no later than the 1st of March. We typically do it in the last week of February. This year we moved it up about a full month for the reasons that we're all familiar with, which is we wanted to give as much runway to the public as we could. We wanted PACE to have more actual or at least preliminary figures for the coming year to work with for as long as you could. And so we have a preliminary budget proposal out there. While PACE is doing its work, and obviously I'm one of 19 and the superintendent is as well, we still have to produce a balanced budget that assumes no override. And that's something we've been getting a lot of questions about. If PACE was created in May of last year to recommend things to us in May of 25, why are there cuts or prospective cuts being talked about now? And that's just a function of the fiscal year calendar of when town meeting is, which is also codified in the charter. It's the 3rd Monday in May. And the fact that we have to, by law, have a balanced budget. Town meeting adopts that budget. If town meeting is going to have a budget to adopt, it can't be prospective. We can't go into town meeting with a $110 million expense proposal if our revenue forecast credibly says 103. There can be multiple budgets at town meeting. There can be a contingent budget article that voters could consider. But even if that's the case, if there's an override that's being considered, if that's ultimately what PACE recommends, the select board puts that to the voters at the town meeting, we still have to have a non-override budget. Because voters would adopt, if let's say the majority of voters wanted the override budget to go to the polls for an election, you still would need to adopt basically the fail-safe budget, which is the non-override balance budget, because much like a building project, it's a 2-step process for an override. The legislative body, which in Easton is town meeting, has to appropriate the budget that says we will do 110 million, and that delta of, call it 7 million, is to be raised pending a successful override election. If that then goes to the ballot box and fails, which is exactly what happened in Easton in 2016, you need a baseline budget, or else you roll into July and you don't have an operating budget at all. So what that means, and I will ask for some grace right out of the gate, if I sound like I'm being defensive, and you are involved in really good keeping me in check, and I would ask you to do it now. What that means is myself and the schools are going to have to start itemizing and making choices that will go into effect July 1st, or there's certain other notice requirements that may be even sooner, that don't take for granted that an override passes, right? Now, town and school operations are different. I won't speak for the school calendar, but I know even on the town side, we've started to have some pretty hard conversations and feedback on why is this one thing being cut in the middle of the year? This is a scare tactic, right? And it's not. It's because when we have been saying for 10 years that our budgets are overwhelmingly people, and if we want to get to balance in a tough budget year through cuts, it will be positions and services, we were telling the truth. And so people will now start seeing those things materialize, not because we're trying to scare people, not because I want to go to work and eliminate a position or worsen a public service, but because I have to put a budget in front of voters on May 19th, working with the schools that will be doing the same, that fits within the revenue we can expect without an override. So that might have been soapboxing and not getting to the heart of your question. I hope that's helpful, because it's kind of happening on top of one another. But we have to proceed, even if PACE tonight said, you know what, I've seen enough, we're calling it, go for a $20 million override. That's not, for the 27 people on Zoom, that's not the number. We still have to put a budget forward that assumes no override unless and until that two-step electoral process from our voters occurs.
Yep.
There is time for that process, if that's what PACE, the select board, and our voters want, to happen before July 1st. But we still need to produce a budget that's balanced with no override. And as we have talked about for a long time, and as I would hope everyone on this committee, and I'm actually going to put all of you on the spot and ask you to corroborate that this has been what you've spent months looking at, has seen, the budget cuts, of course, will have to be positions and programs. I feel we have said this dozens and dozens of times as a team, and now it's beginning to happen. And that's not us trying to drum up support. This is one way or another come July 1st, override, no override. There is going to be a new baseline, right? And we need to prepare for the non-override one. I don't know, Dr. Cabral, if you want to.
I just want to let Dr. Cabral.
Yeah.
That's entirely correct. Unfortunately, that's correct.
Yep.
I was just going to ask then, should we continue with the schedule, or is it too premature to talk after the select board presentation, which I assume is our presentation on March 24th? The next juncture would be budget hearings.
Yep,
Is
sorry, I forgot about that. So I think April is a reasonable expectation for when the non-override balanced budget for both the town and schools will be done.
Sure.
We, in a typical year, target that. In the charter, there's a requirement that the select board and finance committee, and we always bring the school committee as well, have a joint public hearing. I believe no closer than 2 weeks. Don't quote me exactly on that, but that's roughly that ballpark before the town meeting. So the goal there is that the budget is balanced and there's a hearing where the public can come, offer their testimony on it a couple weeks out from town meeting. I can't read into who drafted the charter. I wasn't alive when it was written. But I think clearly the intent there is that there's some runway for folks to really appreciate what that balanced budget is before they vote on it at town meeting. So we always target April. It's usually towards the end of April. I think the schools and I are going to try to move our budget proposals, which are not the same thing as a hearing, and I'm not trying to be kind of overly bureaucratic here, but I issue iterations of the budget at regular business meetings of the select board, usually once a month. I will have one at the next meeting of the board on the 24th, 2 days before the open house, so that people have the most current information. But I think we're targeting early April. Is that fair?
Well, procedurally, the school department doesn't typically present at the joint meeting of select board and FinCom until the school committee has voted on the budget. So we have to do it before that meeting. So it basically backs up from
there.
From the required timelines for us. So we don't have a lot of latitude in when to choose to do it, but that's why it's always been in April, because it fits that timeline.
And if I can add, in addition to the school committee needing to vote on the budget, the school committee is required by law to hold a public hearing on the budget. So the sequence of events is such that we hold that hearing, then the school committee approves the budget, and those two steps happen before that joint meeting that then precedes
that voted
the town
number
meeting.
gets incorporated into the budget proposal I have to submit to town meeting.
Yep. Yep.
So those dates will be forthcoming, so
Yes.
people can, okay, very good.
Yep.
And we are working to find a good date for that joint budget hearing, because it will require all the departments, the finance committee, the schools, and we're trying to make sure we anticipate that it will not be a dry procedural affair with low attendance. So we're trying to make sure we have a good sized venue so that people can participate.
Sure.
And
Dottie, you had your hand raised.
I just think it's important for people who are watching for the first time and are not experts in municipal budgets that at each meeting that we have, the numbers change a little bit each time, because as we get closer to the finish line, we're getting updates on numbers, insurance numbers, things like that get really finalized. Some of the numbers that are in here now are estimates based on prior years, but we could get some wild costs show up, or we could get something that reduces a little bit. So that number, we, at the select board level, will get a change memo at each of our meetings that will give us the most current information on what the budget is. So I just think it's important, like if people see, wait a minute, the last meeting they said this, now they're saying this, that's just the way that these work, and people should be expecting that.
The iterative process.
Right.
I do also, just because we have people that are here and or listening in, so we alluded to the fact that we have in previous sessions identified that the majority of our expense is related to human capital, people, and the programs and services that they run. So for benefit, largely 85 cents of every dollar that we spend on town and school side, on average, is related to people. The next largely 12% is related to fixed items or more fixed items like utilities, R&M, textbooks for the school, contracted transportation, sped expenses. So that's how this committee, through a lot of research, was able to back into large reduction of expenses by definition would most likely impact the human personnel side of the equation. So just wanted to make sure people got that as more and more people are listening in. And just remember that as you go out into the community, that expect those people haven't heard any of our information, and make sure you can ground them pretty quickly with those good stats like that.
And there is a question, is there a line item budget published somewhere for public consumption? And the answer is, for previous years, that's all on the website. We don't have anything up yet, Connor, for this fiscal year.
We have preliminary, the preliminary budget is department by department, year over year trend with their preliminary requests. But as we get closer to balanced budget, we do always produce, before the hearing, a line item budget. To Dottie's point, if you go to easton.ma.us/budget, I think there's no S, you can go to any of the fiscal years, including the current one, which is fiscal 25. We do publish a budget book that has line item detail down to program, department, position, salary.
Anything else, Dottie?
They asked, would there be an opportunity on weekends to meet, or is Friday morning the only time? And I replied back in here that to email you and.
Yep, Easton PASE 2024, if you want to email that. Again, we'll always do our best to try to make ourselves available. We've done pretty well. Jim?
I could do that.
Yep.
Gotcha. So we can certainly figure out a weekend day to have a general
do
info
that.
session as well.
Tom, does that cover it? Does everyone on the committee feel comfortable with the calendar explanations? Any question?
Could I just ask
Sure.
for everyone, town meeting, what happens, I guess, at town meeting? If there's a proposal for an override, what happens if it gets voted on? If the override passes town meeting, what are those dates after that, I guess?
So that's a great.
After that.
That's a great question. So there's a variety of ways that under state law you can kind of structure that cadence. You can have a yes/no ballot vote before a town meeting. That's, at least in Easton, not what we've historically done. I think there's a lot of value of having a town meeting where you can have hundreds or possibly 1,000+ people come and hear the case themselves, challenge it, have that debate. But that is technically possible. But what we have traditionally done is you have the town meeting, and then the election is at some point after that. There's a variety of decisions that can be made that'll influence when that is. Under state law, the select board has the power to call for an override election. They need to know the dollar amount and the language for the ballot at the time that they vote, and it has to be at least 35 days before the election. So there are, as has been the case in the past with a debt exclusion for Blanche Ames or the building projects, the board can schedule the town meeting, and then as the town meeting gets closer and the specific financials are known, they can prospectively schedule the election to perhaps be 1 or 2 or 3 weeks out. Alternatively, the board could, and this gets into some real operational and timing questions, the board could wait until after town meeting if contingent article passed at town meeting and then schedule a meeting for an override, but just with the fiscal year calendar, that starts getting quite tight. That doesn't mean that's not possible. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think people would want to know what happens after.
I think it's a reasonable, again, just using the past, because I don't want to, sound like I'm forecasting what the board will do. It is, town meeting is May, the third Monday in May, it's the 19th. So an aggressive schedule would be a prospectively scheduled election if the information was available for the ballot by the end of May or the beginning of June. But obviously for fiscal year 26, that starts in July. So that kind of necessarily limits you to a 6-week window after town meeting.
I think the goal, I speak for all of us, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the goal is to be as expeditious as possible with all of our recommendations, our insights to support the process that has to happen so that we can hit our deadlines, give the other committees and boards the information they need so that they can go and affect the process. So in all hopes to try to sustain the services that we are here to try to navigate, right? I think that just fits with our charge. So appreciate the calendarization, and I guess I'd just sum it up as to continue to work hard, move fast, move quick, and we'll make sure we do our work so that everybody else can go do theirs, knowing the human impact that this could be, both on the impact of taxes, but also on the impact of people if it doesn't go the override route.
Yeah, and when those dates get dialed in, we will make sure they are widely and broadly publicized. We'll have not yes, no signs, we don't touch that, but signs, the election is this date, town meeting is this date. As the person who submitted a question, it's going to be the choice of the voters. It's their community, whether they're voting yes or no. We want them to participate.
Any questions on calendar or why we have to have a budget that identifies a base level service? Sure.
Been asked several times. If and when we move towards an override, assuming, I don't even want to say assuming, but let's say an override was voted on and passed. At what time does that money become available? Is it immediately? Is it July 1st? Is it?
My understanding is it's July 1st. I've never had an override pass in my career, so.
Yeah, but that's been asked.
But I think it's like an appropriation. It's an additional appropriation effective, right? Just like.
You would be appropriating your estimated revenues, just like any other revenue source for the budget that's effective July 1.
Yep. So we can get it done. Again, there'll be some bumpy timing, which is clunky, but the goal is hopefully we can get there holistically. And I just go back to a lot of people say, but this year. The one thing that we've all agreed on is that sustainability is not this single year. It's about setting up the town for the next 3 to 5 years, so to speak, and all of the funds that would be available over that period of time that the community can work with, or not, whichever the case may be. So everybody gets, we have to do a budget that balances. It can't include the override because we know we're not getting an override. Therefore, it has to, by definition, include cuts. You guys got that? Goal is to figure out how we get the rest of the resources. All right. Next up, discussion on the open house. So one of the things, I want to credit Denise for forwarding some articles as well. So one of the things that I just wanted everybody to know, and as a reminder, and also for the general public, we are not alone. So I will forward you all an article. Boston Globe just came out a few days ago. The title of the article, "We are in a downward spiral," quote unquote, Massachusetts school districts face another year of dire cuts. It's a relatively long article. It's about Ashby. I'm not equating Easton to Ashby, but I will use some general comments just to give you a gist of the argument. So the funding problems could get worse if there are other challenging federal grant freezes. Brookline has a potential $8.2 million budget shortfall this year. Natick preparing to cut $2.8 million, dozens of positions if voters don't approve an override. North Andover may temporarily close an elementary school and slash dozens of teaching and other positions. This I thought was interesting because it reinforces something that we heard. The financial problems come just 5 years after lawmakers overhauled the state school funding formula, which is on track to increase school spending by more than $1.5 billion in 2027, which sounds great. The bulk of that funding, however, was benefited about 3 dozen districts. We have 350 towns and cities. So about 36 districts that have limited means to raise revenue and have among the highest concentration of students with disabilities living in poverty or lacking English fluency. More than 200 other districts, meanwhile, are receiving the lowest levels of increases allowed under state law, which local leaders contend aren't nearly enough to address their needs. So I just wanted to raise this. Denise, thank you again so much for all your engagement, but also sharing this, because it reinforces the dialogue and the communication that we've been sharing. It's not just us. So help people understand that. It doesn't change our problem. It's our problem. We own it. But A, we're not alone. B, a lot of the things that we've communicated as fundamental challenges that are driving it are being articulated publicly. So there's ammunition for you.
There is another paragraph in there which clearly states exact 5 things we've come up with in PACE, like verbatim, listing the inflation, the special education costs, the transportation. It's specific to schools, but some of those things, like the insurance inflation, we know goes into the town, and we know the size of the budget. So it is just exactly what PACE has found out.
Biggest increase in here is exactly what we found. Morgan is expecting health insurance rates to increase by north of 10% next year, and busing costs by 6%. So when people say, like, how did you, I've heard, so just to share some of my stories, why did you wait? And we're like, well, A, we've tried to do the best we can, and we've educated, and we haven't been waiting. There's a lot of activity that has enabled us to last this long. But think about a $4 million increase in fundamental cost structure year over 2 years of health insurance increases. Like, nothing changed. Like, you come in, same people. So there are just some fundamental structural challenges that we face. So it's a great article. I'll send it your way. I say that only as an intro as we talk about outreach and public notification, feedback, assignment of PACE numbers for additional duties, and kind of what do we want this to look like on the 26th. So I defer. I'm not the most creative fella for engaging, so that's why I'm not developing all the materials in that. But does anybody want to start it off? Like, clearly we think there'll be a presentation. The stations were pretty cool. Chris?
I totally don't mean to be Debbie Downer.
But
I've been talking about this for the past, however, some sick reason don't mind talking about this. Friends, family, whoever. I cannot stress enough that there is an incredible amount of public that does not believe this is true, that does not believe the cuts are coming, that does not believe we are going to lose jobs. It has to be somewhere within that open house. I'll call it the Debbie Downer room. I don't care, but like, here's what's happening. This is not a lot. Well, we say every year, and then every year they balance the budget. This is it. We're at the end of the line. And I will say, on the same hand, the people that I've begged to watch these horribly long meetings have all said, "Oh my God, you're right," like, which is a testament to this group that there is some education, but you can only lead the horses to water. But I'm hoping that a lot of people will come to this open house, even agitated, PO'd, angry.
Great.
Maybe they'll leave that way too, but there just has to be a way that, like, our department heads have to be prepared to say, this is what you're losing. And it's not a threat. This is happening. Like, this is because it is. I just today I had several people. This isn't real. They're gonna, they're politicians. It's gonna, come around this, that, and the other thing. And I'm getting tired of being polite about it, but it's, or like, we need to manage money better. Like, we haven't had an override since 2006. So I'm sorry, in my opinion, now, no one's ever going to agree with a town manager, town administrator, board of selectmen that they're doing everything the right way. That's New England. That's like, you have your right to your opinion. But the fact of the matter is, it has in fact been over almost 20 years since there's been any cash injection from the residents. And I completely sympathize with the fact that we have taxes, everything's gone up, but something has to be done. This is like the end of the line. It's real. We're not even heading towards the cliff. We're careening right now. And we need to figure a way to kind of convince people of that at this thing. Like, what I saw at the Queeset out was great. There was a lot of education and stuff like that. No one really went down that dark path. And it's, this is time. And if somebody wants to refute that, I'll happily speak on the things that I know, but that has to be a significant portion of this open house.
So I agree, and I think, no, it's appreciated. But once we said the override word, right, a lot of people perked up. And they, whether they read or didn't, it created engagement. I think we're at the point, we probably won't have department level. I don't think it's, I'll defer, but I don't think that we would say the by department reduction would be this. But I think we can allude and have been trying to say, look, last time we had this issue, it was 27 people for 2.1 million, and we have an $8 million problem. So you could be looking at 104 people if the same ratio applies. And look, I'd be willing to put 104 cutouts, life size, stand it up so that people can see what that looks like if we thought that was jolting enough. I'm not saying we should, but like to your point, that would make it real that you all just walked by 104
This is the only thing people are going to understand.
cutouts that
this is,
if it is.
and I know I've been constantly harping on it, and I apologize.
good.
But,
No, you're
but
right.
it is the only thing that people are going to understand, to the point where it almost has to happen. They have to drive by a fire station and see station closed, cuts and stuff like that. No one wants to see that, but I can get pretty creative with my mouth and how I explain things, but I am incredibly frustrated with what I've been trying to convince people of and just getting tossed right back. They'll come up with it. They'll come up with it. Well, you know what? I understand that that's happened, but it's not happening anymore.
Sure. Connor, then Dottie, then Jim.
Someone said they couldn't hear you. I don't know. You're sorry, I was trying to be subtle.
Sorry, Joe.
So
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. And I am, like I said, I'll have a change memo at the board meeting 2 days before the open house, so we have the most current information to work with. Perhaps this is a failing on my part. I don't love the cutout idea because I get what you're saying, but I will, this is where it gets really difficult, is my preliminary budget laid out very clearly, these are the types of things that we are going to be considering for July. And we need to be thoughtful because it's people's jobs and it's services people rely on. And I understand people want the information as soon as possible, but I will still literally not have the formal rates for healthcare for 800 or so employees and retirees when this open house is happening. And so I have to balance, as does the superintendent, the conflicting desire of giving people as much specificity as possible with the very real reality, and again, if I'm sounding defensive or crusty after 13 years of this, tell me, that if a single dollar of that forecast is wrong, every other thing that is correct will just be completely ignored. And so we are trying to balance that. I will have a budget update before the open house that will begin itemizing some of the things that have already happened since the preliminary budget, and the types of programmatic cuts that myself and the police and fire chief and their unions are having to consider. But I won't necessarily have, and it's this person. At a certain point, and this is a decision for every voter, and I'm not telling them how to feel or how to vote. At a certain point, it is a trust exercise. Yes, there's a deficit every year because we start with a conservative revenue forecast and a request from departments for level services that we can't meet. Yes, we balance it by the end of the year. No, that does not mean it's smoke and mirrors. We're getting actuals year to date. We're getting updated healthcare costs.
We're also cutting things.
And we're cutting things. And the scale, and these are all public. You can go, we don't just put the final budget book online. The iterations of every budget are all there going back 15 years. The scale of it is not the same. We start typically with a $1 or $2 million gap in a typical year, and this gap is 6.36 million. I don't disagree, Chris. I think there are some folks that, for whatever reason, don't think that what we're putting in writing and putting our names and our professional credibility on is going to be the case. And we'll have as much specifics as we can for the 26.
But I think Chris's point is real, right? Like, is appropriate. How do we make it real? How do we, agreed, I don't think he was saying we want names, but the greater the specificity, the more it makes it real, and the easier it is for articulate to the resident public the dramatic impact. And he's got a point. Like, I agree. We have had tough budget years for years, and somehow by hook or by crook, and with some impact along the way materially, we've found a way to get from 2006 to now. So I think it's a great point. I agree. The cutouts was just an exaggerated example of finding a way to make it real, but there's a lot of ways to try to make it real. Dottie had her hand raised, then Jim had her hand raised, and then Denise had her hand raised.
I just wanted to, I'm just thinking about like ways of reaching people, and one of the challenging parts about this or any of the work that we do is that people come in on different times. So people are watching for the first time tonight, right? And they have questions, and I see online the questions that people have in the comments, and we've answered them 47 different ways in these meetings since Labor Day, and they're on the frequently asked questions, and they're on the page, and you can get them here and there. We've got so much information overload, I wouldn't even be able to go figure out where all this stuff is.
Sure.
So this meeting tonight is great that people are here to watch us, but it's not designed, if there's a question, but it's not designed to just like pelt us with questions. Could we set up a 1-hour Zoom meeting or like a hybrid like this where people could come in and we just sit there and answer their questions?
Sure.
Or use the first hour of the next meeting?
I'm sorry, there wouldn't be enough.
What, more than 1 hour?
Well, I think it would be a start, right? I think, so first.
There's really only so many questions. You know.
I have no visibility to your screen, so how many?
No, I don't. I'm not talking about questions on here. I mean questions, overall questions about this whole thing. There's the same top 10 questions that are floating around. And then there's some other ones. But I think that like once they get answered and they're live, and then we can promote that and put that link out for people to watch, because nobody's going to watch it for 5-hour meeting times one every other week that we've had since the beginning. So I just feel like that might be a way to kind of like address the top questions that people are asking, maybe.
And maybe we could hold more than one, you know? And so I think that's a great idea. I think we should put on the list of engagement.
Got it.
And come February 26th. Jim, then Denise.
Yeah, I think what's been so difficult about this committee in general is not only is it a decision between services and the people who work for the town and in our communities, but it's a very difficult decision for me to propose raising people's taxes, and I think about what is the impact to the number of families that might have to go to the food pantry if their taxes go up by $1,000 on top of the public safety building. How many people, and I'm sure it's greater than zero, have to cut back on basic things, like basic things, and those people who already live on the margin. You know, I don't look at it as necessarily a good thing that we could potentially push more families into needing more support from non-governmental sources or governmental sources in general. You know, and those are the people we grew up with. They're the people we volunteered in this town with. And I just don't think that should be ignored in this decision either. And I'm not saying anyone was, but
Agreed.
I think that's the piece of this that the job of the at-large residents is to also bring up that can get lost in the people who work for the government, the people who obviously their jobs are dependent on increasing that revenue. And so I just wanted to make that point as well, that it's an extremely difficult decision no matter which way the committee goes.
Agreed. Denise?
Yeah,
blows up to this one question, so I'm going to ask it, and so we can have it public. The one question I get asked a number of times is it possible to delay the safety complex? So I think that we should talk about that. If it's a definitive no, if it's a maybe, if it's a concern, so that the public knows the answer to that question.
So I have a couple of slides on that, if Wendy can just pull them up. 'Cause we're doing a multi-year tax outlook anyway, so I wanted to have the actuals to work with because I am aware that that's a concern. So Wendy, if you could pull that up, or do you want to do it later?
Well, so the next budget article, the next item on the agenda is about the budget deficit and the override model. So if it's okay, I'd like to finish planning for the 26th, get that done, and then that's a great question, Denise. We'll put it up there.
One thing that Nancy and I ran into when we had that teachers open house at the high school, and I thought was a good question that someone posed, or at least information that we could add, was to, if we're having difficulty looking at specifics within the town, and understandably so, not having the information, is to potentially look at districts around us that went for the override process, it failed, and what it did to their town as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's, areas around here that we have that longitudinal data for, I know it's not a lot of it's still probably in the works, but I think that could be something if people care about their property values. If you look at it pre-override vote, post-override vote, and see if anything changed. As a result, that could be something that we have at least sound data to propose to.
Sure.
Thank you for
Appreciate
noting
that.
that. Yeah, that was very helpful.
Is that something you two could ferret out? That would be awesome. Sir?
Chris Beckamar, 1 Millwood Street. Can we be privy to how many people are actually in the audience on Zoom?
Yeah, it's 26.
Yep.
It is
Yeah, it's
Right up
listed
there.
on the screen.
Public.
shocking. The one at the voice search was 26.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not. Real question is, the 26th, is that session designed to gather the public's opinion, perhaps recommendations? And if so, would those recommendations influence this recommendation towards vegetarians?
I think any feedback would absolutely be taken in. It's a body of evidence that we would welcome. We've invested nearly 100 hours and plus to try to gauge that. Nancy alluded to it earlier. We've met with 65 teachers. We've tried to do the best we can to reach out to all the stakeholders that are involved, and the residents, absolutely. The Queeset House was a great turnout. So we hope everybody shows up that possibly could, and that they come not just to share their feedback, but to digest all of the information that we've shared. Our goal is on May 2025, everybody arrives to that town meeting educated. And look, from that point, people's vote's probably going to be pretty personal about what they believe or they value, and that's deeply respected, whichever way it goes. What we're really struggling hard to do is to make sure it's not a normal town meeting where somebody gets up and asks a question that candidly derails meaningful conversation, and that was answered months before. Hence the outreach, the public sessions. And I know 26 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 25, 26 more than we've ever had. So we're getting there. And the fact that it's a February handle on the month, it gives me cautious optimism that we're penetrating through people's daily lives and will work. But I tell everybody, please, when you go home, send 10 emails. If everybody just sent 10 emails, we would get 260, 300 people talking about PACE tonight and the challenges we face.
And your email is pace2024@gmail.com.
Easton PASE.
Easton PACE
Oh,
2024.
Easton PACE
Easton
2024. I better
PASE.
correct that
Yes,
in my
2024.
chat here.
I just want to add, I think it's a really good idea, and if it's worth it to you both, we could consider having, and I would man it, or something like a table at the open house that has slips of paper, or can have someone just sit and write suggestions from the public. If
Yeah, or we could do like a QR code to like a Google form for people.
yeah,
to
keep it
That's a great
anonymous or
idea.
something.
Because
But-
some people might be, that's, I would imagine, going to be a tense meeting at times, so some people may feel more comfortable submitting it that way. I do think as far as format, what we put here, and Chris, it's a good question. If we could kind of jump ahead of what we were talking about for format, we were thinking the informational presentation, maybe 30 minutes of structured Q&A, like at the mic with the panel, and then having what we did at the open house. This is just what I put on the agenda, but we want to hear feedback of we did at Queeset House, which we got really good feedback from folks, was the like kind of did you know format where we had department heads, volunteers, elected officials broken out in different parts of the rooms and buildings with data as conversation starters, so that if your thing you cared a lot about was fire, you can go talk to the fire chief or a member of a fire union. If you want to talk about schools, you could speak with the superintendent and teachers and have those one-on-one questions as well. I don't know if not to put you all on the spot, but you did ask about format. I don't know if you find that helpful. Sure.
You may have answered this a little bit. Do you have preliminary budgetary information and proposed cuts, I guess preliminary ideas on the table in advance of the 26th or on the 20th?
Yes, I think I would contend we already do, but I think it's a fair point that it feels more amorphous, like saying reduced public safety and public works staff, and reduced 911 response isn't perhaps as specific as people are looking for. So we have put that out already. So if anyone's listening, the 24 people here go to easton.ma.us/FY26 budget. But yes, we'll have an update on the most current information we have being published at the select board meeting on the 24th that will inform what we're talking about with the department heads. And we will have the police chief, the fire chief, the director of public works, the director of health and community services, myself there. Welcome.
Are we able to do a hybrid? We have a question here. Are we able to do a hybrid model or a Zoom in-person, Zoom/in-person on the 26th?
So that's a great question. I'm not sure if we've solved that technological challenge with ECAT yet. We did want to talk about filming it. The hybrid challenge is, would there really be, it's difficult to say we would be able to take all the questions electronically while we're live with a couple hundred people in front of us asking us questions. But if it's okay, I think that's a takeaway for Nancy and I to add that as, can we create that engagement opportunity? Because we'd love to. At the very least, we want to record it this time. Yeah. And maybe we'll take that offline to try to understand what that looks like.
Or perhaps what Jim and you all suggested of maybe it's a different day. I don't know if you were talking about a Zoom Q&A before then. That's pretty aggressive. I don't know if it can be before the 26th, but maybe immediately after as like a second if you couldn't go in person. Just because hybrid is really, it's harder than it looks. And if there are, 30 minutes of structured Q&A almost certainly is not going to be enough for every single person, and that's why we have the breakout after. Right. So.
And I just would feel poor if the experience online didn't match the expectation. Yes. Like, you didn't answer my question. The one thing I do just want to impress, since we're on the topic, I would just ask everybody read the charge of PACE. So absolutely welcome feedback, questions, information. But to the extent that it's far outside the purview of PACE, it puts us in a difficult spot that it's not our charge. And therefore, we'll probably direct you to where that question should be asked. But we've been pretty wide and pretty broad in trying to make sure that the residents get their questions answered. But the more you know about what our job is, the easier it is for us to make sure we can engage appropriately.
I have two potential suggestions, and this goes off Dottie's comment about doing a Q&A beforehand, but to me, it seems worthwhile to make that space at Blanche Ames for what people need. So when they walk in, if they are new to this whole process, there's a space that is potentially just Q&A and gives you like, here's the background, here's what's going on. If you are well versed in what's happening, then you can go to this space, and then we still have like the 30-minute presentation, the other options. But I think like if people are just showing up to the conversation, having spaces dedicated with that super helpful. And then I don't know if this is possible, but I think it would be extremely helpful if there is daycare provided.
Oh, there is.
There is.
Dr. Cabral, would you like
Yes.
to?
Sure. The YMCA has agreed to provide daycare, and I sent the QR code to Connor for people to sign up because they do have to sign up ahead of time. And I also sent it in a message to all staff and families of Easton Public Schools. But that's about the reach that I have, so I sent the code to Connor.
So town crier, I can put that on Facebook.
That'll get shared out through all the town's communications by the end of this week.
And thank you.
Yeah,
And
that's
thank you
excellent.
for.
No, thanks the Y.
Thank you to
Y,
Y.
yes.
They
Yeah.
doing that. I don't know if there's a cap on the number, so if anyone is interested, I suggest
Register
they
sooner than later.
reach out as soon as possible.
Tom and Nancy and Marissa's idea. So one of the things we tried at the first open house was having it open at 6, but not have a presentation till 6:30, kind of so people could get their bearings. But I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, I feel like some of the feedback was, why is the presentation not starting when the program starts? And we had talked about starting with the presentation. Do we want to consider, I don't even know if the school's available at 5:30. Might be tight.
That might be tight, but maybe 6.
Well, it's,
Presentation.
Maybe, it might be tight, but I can check.
so I guess, do we, we've billed it as 6 to 8. Do we have the first 15 minutes just be come in, find a seat, and here's people if you just want to know, like, who are these people and why are they telling me these things? Like, what is PACE? Is that?
I heard some feedback. I heard overwhelming feedback, though, to me, that it worked well.
Yeah.
That people had 30 minutes to mingle, be late, get there when they needed. I think if we were clearer in our communication up front, that the event starts at 6, that it's a mingle for 30 minutes, and then that the presentation would be at 6:30. It lets people get out of work and get there in time. But also, it gives us, I thought the greeters were incredible. It gave us an educational opportunity to say, here's the different stations, here's how tonight works, here's when there'll be a meeting. There won't be a second presentation.
One presentation.
So
Do we want to do that again then and have the first 30 minutes just be like time to get in, ask some preliminary?
A half hour is good.
Yeah, I think that's
A
good
half
too.
hour's fine.
Some
And
people
just
get there on
publish it that, we need to just say that to folks, so maybe out on Town Crier. I know it didn't go out like that on the postcard, but
With the PA system at the school, we'll be able to announce when it's starting. That way people can go over to that area after however much time you decide.
So we'll need a program and volunteers to be the greeters again.
Yeah, I
Okay,
thought
cool.
that worked well. People really gave some
love
incredible
that.
feedback on that.
Looking at you, Chris,
I mean-
for giving me a hard time about being a
I'll
greeter.
do it with you, how's that? I'll be the chips.
You can submit your resume. I'll take a look at it.
Well played.
she's
Kathy.
definitely the hiring
Well
manager
played.
for that, yes.
I have one more, suggestion. You know how we had the easels,
Yeah.
everything like that, which was good. I feel that a lot of people are uncomfortable about asking in person, what's the worst case scenario? What are the draconian cuts? What is going to happen? So I don't know if we can list in various department heads on the easels, like, here's what potentially we're going to be cutting. Because people are real tough on Facebook, they're real tough on Zoom and stuff like that, but then when it comes to face-to-face, the ego shrinks. But again, this is a huge concern. I mean, 4 or 5 times a day, this is the stuff that I hear.
My only question would be, at that date,
We don't know exactly,
yeah,
so I
and
guess
would
you'd have to
those
put
people have been
potential.
noticed? There's
Right.
nothing worse than,
I know, I'm
So
sorry.
I think that we can, I'll speak just for the town side. I'll have some updates on the 24th. We'll have a bit more specificity. We could list of and we did this in the first budget of what may be at risk. The may being there may still give somebody the kind of cognitive framework to say it's all not going to happen. And again, but we can list some more programmatically specific things and have those department leaders there, right? I understand, and having me talk about it through a 20-page memo is very different than talking to the chief of police directly, right? And so I think that's good feedback, and I believe the schools were already pulling did you know posters like that together. We're getting ready for more easels, and yeah.
I think we're just being hyper polite about the fact that if we don't do X, Y is going to happen, and that's that. I know it's not black and white. We're not in a black and white world, but this is what it's come down to. And I know I keep repeating myself like the Rain Man, but nobody is believing this.
Sure.
I mean,
Some are.
I'm
but
just
I'm with
trying
you.
to find different ways that, like, if I had I'm happy to say if I had a nickel for every time I heard over the past 2 weeks, wow, it really is that bad. I'd probably be able to get a small coffee, but at least it's a start. You know,
Do you think it'd be helpful, like if, like one of the questions we ask on maybe like that survey or the Google form would be like what the residents kind of see the size of the problem being? You know, like just so that we can kind of get feedback from them, because I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around what do we want each of these residents walking out of that meeting? Like, what's our goal? Like this meeting, is it just to inform? Is it to really just like?
I want them
to-
walking out saying, holy cow, this is real.
Right. So how do we get that to happen? Like what? Like, and we're not going to be able to give specifics, right?
I would think the ultimate goal of this is, again, whether they're going to vote yes or no in a specific direction, to say, this is your choice, right? I have, friends who have said, oh man, I really hope they do something about it. I'm like, who's they? It's you.
Right.
These will be community decisions. So just my lens on that, and it's not all of it, is I hope that what the takeaway from the 26 is whether you agree with PACE's preliminary recommendations or you don't agree. I wasn't saying that implying you don't agree with your own committee, but you're the closest person to me. That you come away knowing May 19th is really important, that there may be an override and what that would look like and how you exercise your rights to participate in that.
That you have a voice.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sounds like too naive and Schoolhouse Rock of me, but I think that's...
No, their recommendation comes in the vote on May, when we hopefully have educated as best as possible, and the people go and vote in May, and they say, I'm not for it. I appreciate all that you said. I agree with it in terms of the data, the facts, but I disagree that the takeaway is whatever PACE has recommended. Or, thank you, I didn't have this information. I do agree with you now that you've laid it out, and that's going to influence my vote. Yeah.
Because like I feel like our January one was to alert people, right? Like that was the goal, is to alert them to the problem, that we all agreed that there was a problem. And now it's like, okay, now we want them walking away being a well-informed voter, right? Like, so like
And
your
that we
choice
recommend
is
an
in your
override.
vote. Like, and I feel like that's something that we're going to have to like really hammer home. If we're going towards an override, I think really getting out there that your choice will be in your vote, and to have that be as well informed as we can. So I'm just trying to kind of picture it. And like we had a lot of people that stayed and didn't go to your presentation, at least, and maybe it was because they were waiting for the second one, and how do we want to handle that? Do we want everybody going and hearing all of that information at once? Are we going to allow them to still like walk around and go to the different stakeholders? I just think like programmatically we need to kind of figure that out, and like just like also keeping in mind, what do we want everybody walking away thinking that last thought?
True. I would just add one step in there. We want to so the process we did exactly, A, we have a problem, everybody, so please engage. B, we've identified the size of the problem and we're recommending a solution. That solution, I need to educate you as to the why we recommended that. And if we do that at 226, then we've done a good job of getting them to where we are now. If if something happens there that gives us new data or new information, that wow, we've been comparing it at per capita, and it's not supposed to be per capita. It's supposed to be per squirrel, right? Like, wow, I didn't know that. I'm highly confident in the diligence and the research that we did. So to me, it's about telling them then, here's why we're recommending an override. And here's what the cost of those expenses will be, the reduction. And please come and ask us. Like, why is it an override? Because we fundamentally staff leaner than all of our comparable communities. We expend leaner than all of our comparable communities. We're concerned because the residents pay the second highest average tax bill in all of our communities. They have the second highest home value in all of our communities. So there's a balance of understanding. Doesn't make it right, but there's nuance that we have had 100 hours to tease out that got us to 6.4 and 1.5, that if we do a good job on 226, they get that. I'm with I am with Chris in the sense that I want to be highly motivational to create engagement so that people appreciate the reality of the situation. So yeah, I think you're spot on. And then in terms of the good news is we are upping our game to Blanche. So now it won't be one small room that had standing room only, which was still impressive, by the way, standing room only. But like we'll have hopefully a few hundred people that turn out at Blanche James. That would be standing. Oh, did we just break a wire code?
No,
Okay, I got nervous. Go for it.
we have 800 students there, so no.
Right, I was nervous about the room.
No, I was just gonna flag you for when you were done.
Oh, sure. But is that fair? Does everybody feel the same? Like, hopefully now, and then we've led them there, and the rest of it just becomes educational opportunities from here to May. We present to the board. I think Jen had her hand raised, then Leisha. and
Just
then
want to
Denise.
ask one quick, do we have a snow date? If there is a snow?
We do not.
No snow.
But we would pivot, and I'm sure we would try to find another
Wait, the
opportunity.
winter's going.
The most aggressive plowing ever.
Right.
There will be no snow.
Jen?
So if I can ask, Chris, if I can ask you a question. Can you give us a sense for the folks you're speaking to who you're kind of hearing they'll figure it out, it's not real, we've heard this before thing. Can you give us a sense for like what degree of specificity do you think would be meaningful for somebody who's coming with that point of view? Because I know at the January open house on the schools, at least, there were suggestions of, larger class sizes, fewer electives, things like that. Is that impactful, or is it, we would anticipate elementary class sizes would be X and high school class sizes would be Y, and we would reduce electives, or, and I can speak about the school specifics because that's what I'm familiar with, and we have been having very frank conversations within the school circles with estimates of, we are looking at X number of reductions, and here's what at a high level this would mean, but we're not going to get down and say, this department of 10 people is going to lose X number of people, because that's too specific.
So I have lived through this before.
Yeah.
I've seen people get pink slips. I've seen people get laid off.
Yeah.
And I know what, I'm not going to say has worked in the past, because that's a bad way to say it, but unfortunately, I think on the 26th we'll have educated a lot of people, but I think a lot of people will. I've watched this. Connor's done some amazing speeches with some of the unions and stuff like that, and they've yes, and then they go in the other room and they just still have their own opinion. 50%, 25% of the people have just made up their mind. They're going to be no, and it doesn't matter. You can waste all the time you want as far as educating them. Mm-hmm. What I do know that I'm not going to say has worked, but has been impactful are the specifics. And I know the timing is not right yet for the specifics, mm-hmm. but what hits home are the larger class sizes, the very specific subjects that they may lose within the school system, the sports that they may lose within the school system, okay. the less police officers, the closing of a fire station. How long can you hold your breath? It's going to be that much longer for response times, mm-hmm. and to say nothing about what the DPW does with potholes plowing, this type of stuff. It's all going to. There has to be the deficits of this magnitude. There'll have to be cuts across the board. And speaking in general terms, to the average taxpayer, it just sounds like the same thing that they hear year after year mm-hmm. after year, and then we end up balancing the budget. At some point, we have to go down that dark path of specifics. And it's unfortunate that it's going to sound like a threat, but that is I'm afraid that is going to be the most motivational and educational piece within this to help some people understand. We haven't done this, and it hasn't been this bad in almost 20 years. We've done, an amazing job. If you have the time to follow town politics and see how these budgets get balanced and stuff like that, they pulled it off. Yeah. It's just, at some point, you got to take a car in for an oil change, and a tune-up's needed, and we're here.
Chris, let me pose something to you for this idea. And I don't know if this would be comfortable, because it could be construed as misleading, but if we said we know, hypothetically, we had 1,000 employees in the town and school, and we believe that if we used the last time we had reductions, that ratio, that's 100 people, and we just allocated the 100 reduction by the department size, like that would, in some way, it would say that's 50 teachers, 25 police, 15 fire. This isn't accurate, but that's the size of the reduction if it was just allocated equally. That would tell you, I mean, it's going to be it's going to be educational system, it's going to be police, fire, and DPW are the largest departments.
Right.
And it would at least allocate the numbers of a potential impact.
So the worst thing that we can do is say there are going to be X cuts to whatever, and then let's say we have the worst case scenario, we don't get an override, we have to go with the doomsday budget, and then those cuts don't happen, then there is zero credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that is, and I totally appreciate Leisha and Connor's position, because it's hell right now. It's, and to think, I know you're both compassionate and you both associate faces with cuts, and this is not an easy thing to do. And I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on people to vote for an override or anything like that, but I'm mostly frustrated with the lack of people not believing that it's here.
Sure. I
You
get it.
know, and
Yeah.
that's, so I very, very specifically remember back in '06 when this was going on, and there were cuts. I mean, we had to lay people off that were in the fire academy that we had just hired, and it happened. And the other thing that people, I'm not going to vote for an override until I see cuts. Well, that's great, but those people don't come back once you lay them off. They find jobs elsewhere, and nor would I blame them for not wanting. Well, you just laid me off. What's going to happen if it happens again next year? You know, and it's just trying to urge the residents to understand that. But again, not to beat a dead horse, we have to get as specific as we possibly can as far as school side, town side. Here's what we're looking at losing.
Sure. Okay.
And it's plain and simple. And this is going to happen if this doesn't pass, and this is going to happen if it does pass.
But also, we're already making cuts.
Right.
I mean, the town pool was just, that's.
And you know, looking at some of the feedback about that, they're hitting us where it hurts, and stuff like that. It's like, well, what do you want? That's a luxury. We have necessity that we have to try and protect, and at some point, necessity is going to be cut too.
But also, even with staffing, freezing positions is reducing a position.
Attrition
So that
is-
might not be something that people see in a list like that. Just closing the window at town hall for paying your taxes for a period of time during the week.
But to be clear, if I wasn't just closing the window, we eliminated a job, right? Like
Right.
that. And again, the feedback of they're picking things that hurts. Like it will all hurt.
That's muscle time to cut, not fat.
So if I could, I'm just
Yeah,
going to bring
sorry,
us
Ed.
back. That's okay. I'm going to bring us back to the open house. At the conclusion of this debate for us, I'll reach out on this warrant article to the public. Dr. Cabral, you had your hand raised.
I was just gonna say, Chris, welcome to our world. We have literally been saying it for 10 years. I am encouraged that we have spent time with all of you, and by your specific questions and getting factual answers, you don't have a list of people, but you believe it. And I think the important thing is, what are the questions? And I'm happy to give you the answers. I've been getting emails and questions. If you just got rid of this person, you would be fine. That's not mathematically correct, but I'm happy to explain that and then I never hear from them again. So I think sharing factual information is what's important, because people say, well, if you hadn't done this, and I say, well, that actually never happened. So I don't know where you heard that, but it didn't happen. We have evidence in the data. If you want to come in, my door's open. Let's look at it together. Never hear from them. So I think if we can even just get people to look at factual information, that's a huge leap. For example, everything I've ever said to the school committee is televised. Same thing with Connor, but I'll just speak for myself. I have never said in a budget meeting, they're every April, if you want to go back and look at the school committee meeting in April, I have never said we are laying off people. Except for 1 year, and I laid off people. So saying that we say that every year, or saying that we find it every year is inaccurate. They don't have to watch a million things. They can go back to one meeting. They can go back to last April. Any April before that. They can watch one school committee hearing, because I did it every single year, where I say, this is level service rolled over, because that's what Connor asks for every year. That means we maintain all the services and all the people. This is what it would be to do the same thing this year, next year. And then I go through an exercise with the staff, and they say, we really need this. I'll use one example, multilingual learner teachers, because our enrollment has gone up. We really need this. So we add it to the list. And that's the first number we start with, because we have our professional educators who are with the children every single day. It's not me. It's not my budget. It's not me sitting in a closet somewhere doing whatever. It goes through every single person in the district. And they tell us what they need, starting with the strategic plan to meet the needs of children. That is what they do every single year. We put that together and we present it. It's our responsibility to present what the educators are saying the children of Easton need. And then we hear, through Connor, what the taxpayers are willing to pay. That $1 to $2 million deficit every year is the difference between what we present and what we hear, okay, but this is what you're gonna get. Okay. And every year, I'm sure Connor does the same thing, every year I itemize exactly what we're cutting out of what the educators say we need, and exactly what we're cutting out from what we proposed to get to that number. That's in black and white. That goes out every year. It's recorded for posterity. People can see that process. You can see exactly what was cut last year. You can see exactly what was cut the year before. It's usually shuffling things around, but we never find money. We've never closed that gap by finding $2 million. That has never happened one time in my 12 years here. We've always closed the gap by going, okay, we're gonna wait on this for another year. We're not gonna do that this year. That's how we close the gap. We've never found money before. That's just factual. So people can go and find that, but it's about them basically trusting. But they don't have to trust based on blind faith of what we're saying now. Go back and look. It's there. It is there. And they can see for themselves. And unfortunately, me saying X amount of students in a class in a grade, I've just indicated somebody that's been laid off that I have not gone to them face to face and told them that's going to happen, because these are human beings and this is what we do. And I am going to have to go and see more than 40 people. And I can't do that that quickly. There are legal things that have to be done when you give a pink slip. There's unemployment information you have to give. Like, it's not just you wave a wand. There are very legal and ethical things you need to do for these human beings. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very difficult to have. I'm not going to have that for the 26th, but I hear what you're saying. It reminds me of a short story I used to teach when I was an English teacher called The Life You Save May Be Your Own, and it was very simplified. It was the story about signs on the freeway trying to get people to slow down, and it didn't matter. Again, I'm exaggerating now. It didn't matter if it said, you might kill a small child, you might kill whatever. It's not impactful until it says, the life you save may be yours. And so I hear what you're saying. If my kid isn't in music but they play sports, I want to know sports are being cut before I care. Or vice versa. I hear what you're saying. And that's super unfortunate. But I can tell you, at least from the school department, every single school, every single department, every single everything is going to be touched. People don't want to believe that. That's very unfortunate, but all the data and information is there. And maybe if they just stop and ask the actual question from an actual source and not 15 telephone lines later, if they ask the question, I will provide the evidence. Don't follow me on blind faith again. I'll provide the evidence. Maybe if they just see, oh, I thought that was true, but it wasn't, maybe they'll believe it a little better. I don't know. But to compromise these people, to try to shock them into it, I hear what you're saying. Reminds me of that story. But February is too close for me to do that in an ethical way. The people are going to be laid off.
If I could, so appreciate it, because I think it's super helpful. I just want to clarify, I don't think anything that was said was at odds. I think we as a committee...
No, I'm agreeing with Chris.
I know, I just want to make that for everybody's statement. Where I'm going with it is we have a responsibility to create awareness and a sense of urgency, and we're doing that. It might not be as impactful as we wish it could be or as detailed as we'd like it to be, but we will never not think of the people. I think that our committee stands firm on that.
I'm sure, Chris,
but-
I don't think that you were suggesting that.
No, not at all. But we have to make it real. And the only other thing I'd say is all of your words I agree with, but there are a lot of theys out there that have learned. There are a lot of people that are engaging. There are people that are here tonight. They're online. And so I just want to make sure we know as a team we're making progress. So don't quit. Keep giving information. Keep hammering away on the details so that people can be informed because they're hearing it. I'm getting calls. I can't imagine. Chris is getting calls. Clearly you're getting calls. And these people may not, in our minds, be at the same place we are at or have the information base or candidly, in my case, they weren't positive. That's okay. It was curiosity, and that's why I led with it, that like, all right, I hear what you're saying, but I think you're really asking this question. And if you want to know, to your point, like, you want me to make it real? Like, you want to know where or what? It's going to probably be everywhere. That's what we heard. Arts Cabral said it. She said that before. So it's going to probably be everywhere. And on the town side, I think you all got your water bill. There's already somebody that isn't there to accept your payment when they used to be there down the hall. Town pool.
And-
So
and-
those are
and
the.
it will
So I'm
be-
going to
it'll
bring
be
us
everywhere.
Yeah. So I just want everybody to feel comfortable to be able to share that, and for some people, recognize it won't be real. No matter what you say, they will not be real, and that won't be because we failed. It'll be because they're right at water, and they just didn't want to consume what we were giving them. And that's okay. That's just keep plugging away. I just want to make some progress. Yeah. So I'll only ask if it's really additive to this particular item.
Yeah, I just wanted to nail those down.
Yes, good. All right, then I'm with you.
Cool.
Love it. Great. So basically what we're saying is we're going to have a 30-minute presentation. We do want to have stations where we have the very similar structure that we had before, where there's a school position, there's a town. I do think that we have to really buttress what the resident experience is, meaning, like, I think we have to lay out in great detail what their tax bill is, what their value is, what the increase or decrease will be of all the future debt roll-ons and roll-offs, and what the impact of this will be. Because, Jim, you said it best, and we have said it as a committee, the human side of this is both sides. There will be people that can't afford to pay it if we go that route. And then there will be people impacted from a job perspective, and probably both, candidly. If we're recommending an override and a reduction, there will be faces on both sides of that coin. So I just feel like we could really buttress that by letting people know their tax impact. Yes.
So I do have a question that pertains to this, a suggestion about the open house. If we had a handbook or a link for people like her who are new to town government processes and committees and boards that explains how town government works, who does what. Some was touched on it tonight, but the takeaway or something more detailed for residents to review to really be able to understand what is happening. And I don't love paper printout stuff, but maybe, you know, if
Could
we
be a
could
card
put
with a
something
QR
on
code.
Yeah, so
a
we
QR
have,
code or something on the PACE website.
We can carve out, our budget books have like a 3 or 4 page citizen's guide to the budget. that lays out the fiscal year calendar that we have to follow, who puts what forward, whose responsibility it is to do what and why, where voters engage, how they engage, what the boards are, who's elected, who's hired. We can carve that out, because I don't want to give people a QR code to a 400-page PDF, because that's really mean to do to people, and make that a direct link. So I hopefully that can help.
And even, I think, a timeline for what we talked about tonight, but, this date, this has to happen, just a mention of the two budgets that would be presented. The select board is going to vote on this date to, put it on the warrant or not put it on the warrant.
That's a good idea. Jen?
Could we, in terms of, and I know we're going to discuss a little bit about the tax impact of sort of, everything together, right? What's rolling on, what's rolling off, et cetera. Will there be a calculator online where somebody could plug in? And I know we won't have the recommendation for this override, but if somebody could plug in their home value and what just like we did on the spreadsheet, but incorporating some of the bigger projects, right? And if that could be up and running before the meeting, that could be another something that there's a QR code, and if somebody's curious, to say, okay, if we recommended an override of $8 million, this is what it would look like on your tax bill. Plug in your own home value and watch the projection.
So typically you do that when you have a number, because the variable is what's your home value. I'm sure there's a way to have multiple variables in there. I'm just not sure. We've done the tax calculators for every project, but it was always when the cost, in most cases the debt service cost was known, and so the factor was just what's your value.
Yeah.
We have a spreadsheet and a model for you tonight that will inform, I think, what do we think is constructive.
Yeah.
So we will do our best.
Okay.
But as far as like the existing baked in things that have already been approved, we have that very dialed in. So we.
Yeah, because I think for some voters, right, it's scary, right, to think, okay, we voted for this, we voted for that, now you're asking for more. What can I afford? And then if you see the number and go, oh, that's a new phone, or that's tires and brakes on my car.
They don't want to pay for that.
I might be in a position to absorb that, or break that down to this is the cost per month, and it makes it a more tangible, realistic number for folks. to
Yep,
have
we're
an
gonna.
idea.
The goal is
So-
to make it real. We've been sharing $111 per
million, roughly.
Per million.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we want to lean in on that.
But also what the real numbers turned out to be,
Yep.
with the Blanche Ames. Do you want to just talk about that a
Well,
little bit, Connor?
I'm
Are we
going
pulling
to.
from your
get
I'm
there.
trying to
Let's
respect
wrap
the
up
agenda,
the 26th.
because that.
Does anybody
we
else have
that.
other comment? I don't think we'll be able to do tours. I don't want to take that away, but I'm not sure timing would permit. So, anything else
target.
on 226?
I don't want to open a can of worms, but could an activity be helpful? Something like we were saying with the plug in your numbers, or just getting feedback. I mean, like you said, this is an exercise in trust. Like, I know that's opening a box, but like, why don't you trust this process, or what?
Do you mean like something like put in your value and we'll give you like a graphic of where your taxes today go?
I'm just thinking like getting some sort of feedback from the population of whether it's a survey at the end,
Yeah.
or it's just like,
Yeah, I think
That,
so.
yeah.
I took a note here, Tom. Can I just say, like, this is what I think that I heard from the committee, because my team and Leisha's team are going to meet and do walkthroughs and make sure that we try to pull this off. So first 30 minutes is come in, did you know sign, what is this, who are you, QR code with a how does this all work, what's the calendar, and how do I engage. Is that correct so far?
A handout, right? Did you say that?
Greeters with
handout.
programs to hand
Yeah.
out. So that's 6 to 6:30, then a 30-minute presentation by PACE. That's going to be in the cafeteria. We're going to have chairs set up so people are not sitting at kindergarten-sized chairs for 2 hours, because that doesn't lead to people feeling great. Q&A formatted. Is everyone like a formal Q&A with a mic and back and forth with the community for 30 minutes, and then the last 30 minutes be kind of free form, go to the department heads and other people you care specifically about to ask questions? Is that okay? Some of the feedback is the level of specificity we can get to, maximize that, understanding the constraints, print some of that out. Some type of survey, both a paper one and a QR code if people want to give additional feedback or they didn't have time to ask their question. Jim, is that fair? Okay.
sign up sheets for emails? If we could get that
Yeah,
from people?
and then I think the program that we hand out will have like, this is what tonight looks like, this is who these people are, here's all the web-based resources, here's contact information if you have other questions or you don't engage with things on a web-based resource and you want a different way to do that. Okay. And again, the kind of like I don't want to sound patronized, but like a 101 thing, right? Like a government 101 based scan a link. We could probably, Sean left, so I'll say he'll do it. Create a dedicated web page that it lands at that has like a link tree of like, how does the budget work? And then a separate link for, okay, what's the budget right now? Who is PACE and why? And people can kind of navigate that. Is that? Sure.
I would just try not to create all,
the entire
to minimize
PACE.
work, right?
Yeah.
Like, just use wherever you can. That is easier. Like point them to the PACE.
And
webpage.
then I think on the handout as well, the key dates we know are coming.
Yes.
May 19th, budget hearings, April. Is that accurate?
That sounds
Sums
good
up
to me. Yep.
what I think.
I think I'd like to add how to stay connected.
Yeah.
And just have a page like, here's how you sign up for the town crier, here's how you follow us on Facebook,
Yep.
Twitter, whatever we're on.
Like Jim's point about collecting feedback or collecting questions, I know it's always great to get things anonymously, but then you can't answer.
Yeah.
You know, like I've had reports, oh, so-and-so was at a restaurant on Friday. Oh, well, so-and-so doesn't work on Fridays, so good for her. You know, like there's no way to answer them so they know, and so they walk around going, oh, people are abusing the system and they don't even do it. I just like to be able to get answers to people. I think it lends itself to that distrust when we can't answer. So I like getting questions, and I understand why people might want to be anonymous, but then it's difficult because then I can't answer them. And I can't help
So-
them understand that what they said was actually not accurate or...
Fair. I think we give them the option.
Yep.
I think you have to give them the option of feeling comfortable to ask the question. On all the anonymous ones, I think we can probably take those and categorize them into general buckets.
Okay, that was
And-
going to be my question. Can
and
we do
that
like an
way-
FAQ,
Look, if we don't have the
something?
name, we can't be held accountable for not getting back to them. But I think we can probably tease out the threads of what the anonymous people are trying to communicate. And then the people that do give us their information to contact them, we can try to work through that. I would just set expectations that about the time of response. Give us some time to try to get back to you. And we might group a lot of the ones that are alike and do a general reply type thing. I'm just thoughtful of everybody's
Could
time.
even do like the most common questions and answer them somewhere that we could post so that people could see the answer to
Yeah.
the question. Even
We
the
could put a link
comment.
on the page. Here are the most common questions we received from February 26th. Thanks everybody for
Just
coming.
to try to get back to them about concerns that
Yeah.
they have. I don't want them to think that we don't pay attention.
We could
No,
put,
I think we all
could
do a
put
good
right
job
in
of that.
there, like,
Yeah, I agree.
if you want a direct follow-up, you need to give us your contact info, and if not, we'll put it online at a later date. We do have an FAQ page for PACE. I would like if everyone on PACE, especially before 26, looks at it again and gives feedback to my office on, is this constructive? Are these the things we're hearing people ask? So that is current, or as current as it can be. My office has tried to keep that updated so that as like the fiscal 26 budget has rolled out, it's more current and says, this is what we're looking at for July 1.
Sure.
But if you go to the PACE FAQ now, that would be helpful.
Love it.
Cool. So what I have
Is
those
the
notes,
committee
are we-
good with the February 26th open house agenda item? I feel like the audience had their hand raised during that dialogue. Was it about the February 26th open house?
Not about mechanics, but maybe just one question.
Sure.
Aaron Borstein, 31 Walton Drive. When people are making this decision, which is going to be based on their own personal self-interest to a large extent and their own finances, having grown up in a town that went through a similar thing and ultimately had to do the drastic cuts and lost all their public works and fire and police, and then the next year when everyone found their homeowners insurance shot up higher than they would have paid for the override, it was a change of mindset.
Sure.
So I wasn't sure if there's a way of estimating if these cuts were to come to place, what that impact might be on both your home value, but also what it might also impact in terms of your homeowner's insurance, because that is part of the math, I would say. To think about, particularly when it comes to public safety. If you don't have a fire department to put your house out, fire out, your insurance company may.
That's actually a really good question. I'll check with the chief on the ISO ratings and.
There are realtor metrics on things like that?
So I think we should explore it
Yeah.
and check with the chief.
Sure.
First thing that I thought of what would be impactful is if you stood up and said that to 300 people. And the reason is, obviously, we're reticent to give anybody advice on what their insurance costs will be next year. And then, because we don't know the other variables, right? But hearing that feedback to me was impactful. I appreciate it. I'm not sure I can quantify it, nor quantify it in a way that I would make a public commitment about it. But if you're willing to check in with the chief.
Yes, but I agree. I mean, you're referencing a specific experience you lived through, and and I've had that conversation with residents who come to town hall or called concerned about the situation, and I said, having the chief bureaucrat say more money always is not super compelling, right? If there's something you have a perspective on, talking to your neighbors is more effective.
Super helpful.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
But if there is a way that we can legitimately quantify that for the public, that would be helpful. At the very least, we could raise awareness, exactly.
That making a choice now is a potential choice that you're going to see costs.
Yeah.
Another way.
Yeah. And the other consequence that we've heard is that, candidly, there is a correlation between override activity, service levels, and home values. That's pretty data-driven through time. I don't have that handy yet, but that's on my list to get smart about before we get there, because that's also something people don't find tangible because they don't sell their house every day. So to them, it's just locked up value they don't access. So it's hard to make that real as well. Okay, so we're gonna move on to item 5.
Sorry, Tom, if I could just clarify one last thing, just because it's important, because people on the committee have said this is important. Is everyone on the assumption or comfort level that Tom and Nancy are basically going to make for presentation, and that there is not a meeting between now and the 26th? And if not, does anyone want to raise their hand to work on it besides Tom and Nancy, right?
We'll definitely take feedback. We have the shtick down. We're obviously happy to do it. The only slides that we would be adding most likely so here's the challenge, right? You have to make sure you're planning for relatively the lowest common denominator of educational balance. So the Queesit House presentation largely holds. It's the one we give. The slide that I would expect we would add would be the initial recommendation of the committee, which gets you to the override and the expense recommendations. And then lastly, a really buttressed slide or two about the resident impact on the taxes. So those two things I would build out to make sure we're giving equal opportunity to the facets. I might add in, because we have 30 minutes, not the 20 minutes we had before that went to an hour and a half. I might add in just a little bit more about the details of, I don't want to gloss over that 85 cents of every dollar go to people. Mm-hmm. I think that we need to tell people how we arrived at that this isn't just this year. It's not because we have extra people. It's because we literally have cut everything else out. So I would say we can commit to getting the committee the presentation. I can commit to definitely saying it will not be new information except for what I just said.
And I would add to pull some of the stuff from the preliminary budget, right? Because that's one of the questions that we hear, and it ties back to what Chris and others have said, which is they've had a budget, they always say the budget's hard every single year. So, and they always get there, but there are some things that are acute and new, right? Like the health insurance, and I think people should see that. I don't know of any, because I think it also reflects people's own experience in their life.
And we won't do the exercise where we ask everybody to fill out the answer to the 3 questions. Instead, we'll give them the answers that we gleaned from the Queesit House to share the interconnectedness of. The first answer is we all love open space, rec space, the parklands, and then on the challenge and opportunity, it's new growth, and how those two things in a residential forward community with 1/3 of your town protected from taxes are at odds with each other of increasing your tax base. Can be construed as being at odds of increasing your tax base. And that's really the takeaway is, and we want to share with that, and I know you said it earlier, and I loved it because it enables me to say this next point. We get a lot of, you are telling me this, and I've been telling a lot of my residents to have a sense of ownership. You voted for last year's budget. You voted for the year before that budget. You may not have picked everything. Maybe you voted no and you get to say, I told you so and I was right, whatever that is. But everybody I've talked to, I have been very explicit that we as residents own the values and policies that our budget puts forth. We voted for it. So we got what we asked for. that will have the same luxury of doing that again this year. But I know you didn't say it to mean it that way, but there is no you in this. I really think it's important that it's a we thing. Residents need to understand we have a sense of ownership and an obligation to engage, and that's why I appreciate this committee kind of existing. Now, can we move on to item 5? We have a shot at getting out of here before 10 o'clock, people. I hope you see this. You guys don't believe me. Okay, so one of the things for the further discussion on the PACE recommendations, I wanted to circle back on 2 things. One, we gave you a tool that was a financial calculator, so you could put in different variables, like what happens if we get a little bit more revenue, so on and so forth. And then what do you get for a sustainability trend in the next 5 years? Everything I did, you guys know where I netted. Year 2 or 3, we start to have a challenge again. The other thing I want to say is I want to make sure, and we said this, I believe, but I want to be very clear. This committee's recommendation should be based upon what you think the right thing is for the town to go and do and engage. I would leave out the political aspect of, but I only think I could get that passed. I don't know if they would vote for that. When the warrant article gets placed, that whole discussion and debate about town feedback and what they can and can't afford will happen. But I am just asking you, your recommendation should be what you think the right thing to do is to support a sustainable 5-year vision of Easton. And so if it's, I'm going to exaggerate, I think it should only be $1 million override because that's all I think anybody would ever accept that they pay, and it's $6 million expenses, but I really don't believe that. And here's the sense of ownership I'll share. If you are advocating, nobody was, so I'm going to use it, a $6 million expense reduction, I need you to say to yourself, I believe that we should reduce $6 million of expenses and reduce the number of positions that are with it. Like, I believe that. We have too many people, we should cut that. And that's okay. That's a valid statement. If it's revenue, I need you to say, I believe the residents in our community should pay more. So I wanted to give that lens to look through instead, in case anybody wanted to change how they allocated their hybrid. That's why I'm all revenue. I believe we have a revenue problem. I don't know if the average resident can bear that. I don't. But my solution from all the evidence I've seen is a straight override, that we fundamentally have a revenue problem based upon our values and our build. You guys know all my reasons. Given that lens, and given the file that you've had access to, and I should probably call up the file so that I have it, I'd like to go around again to see, and maybe bear with me, do you want to see the multi-year tax impact first? We could do that. That's the next item. But I just want to ask everybody again, did you change your mind? Or if you're $8 million override, your statement is, yes, I want to make sure that the residents bear the entire solution of this. That's what I believe is the right thing.
But do you want the question posed for just this year or for the multi-year? Because that might be a different answer for folks.
I want it in the same exact context we gave.
Okay.
So if you said before, I have an $8 million problem and it's 7 in 1, do you still believe that?
Which was for this year.
That's for this year. The solution for future years could come from a different amount of variables and permutations.
That's fine.
Maybe next year the GIC health insurance goes down 10%.
Probably.
Not going to happen. But, right, like, so.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, but that's a great question.
Yeah.
So everybody, I'm good. I've put forth 8. I wish it was 10 to get us a 3 to 5 year runway, but I think 8 is the one, and there'll be some challenges on the expense side. So I'm still 8 no. Does anybody want to change what they gave last week?
In retrospect, I think I was by being even, I was uneven, so I would change it still the same amount, but I had 50-50, it wouldn't be 50-50. It would be less reduction in force.
So what was your total amount, Chris?
Well, I couldn't change it because I'm economically challenged and my computer was broken, so I couldn't use the device, so I couldn't come up with a number. But I had 4 and 4. I had what, 8 million, 4 and 4.
Okay.
Sure. And you're
and I think the 4 and 4 was was too much reduction for staff or for employees. And so it would be, I think I would probably do, I think I'd even go up even much higher, maybe to a point where there is some reduction, but the minimalist that you can do, so that you can have the services, so that the roads can be taken care of, and so that all those things can be taken care of. And so I think my first judgment was 50-50, but I think it was too high. So I would go, I said 8, so probably 8, and then the town would then cover 7.5. So it'd be closer to you.
Okay, so
7.5.
7.5.
The 7.5
Override
as opposed to
0.5.
8.
Got it.
Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I still stand by my 8.
Sure.
But I was thinking about the sustainability aspect. And the suggestions I made the last meeting, but I did touch upon it the last meeting as far as I think it's difficult to ask people to pay more and get cuts. So I would urge that we consider if there are cuts in the form of attrition, that's sometimes a little bit more palatable. It sounds better. But I could not recommend asking taxpayers to pay more and have cuts. That makes no sense to me. I would rather say I'm concerned with sustainability for 3 years than if that's what I have to do to get sustainability for 5 years, that's just me.
The only thing I'd say is, and I'm probably speaking for people, so if anybody thinks I'm speaking incorrectly, please correct me. In every year, in every budget, regardless of whether or not you have lots of money or no money, there are reallocations of human capital. Meaning, right, like if all of a sudden fire calls, I'm going to use you because you're here, go up 150% for 3 straight years, they will probably over-index on trying to staff them, and it may come at the reduction of some other department that isn't experiencing the same challenges, and candidly we can afford because of the safety issue. So when we say 0 cuts or no cuts to the community, I'm not sure that, I feel like that's not the right statement, because no matter what happens, if 1,000 kindergarten kids come in next year and we have to have 100 teachers hired, that's gonna come from somewhere else. Like, we can't just add 100. So I would just preserve, I have tried to articulate, the goal is to provide the same level of services and programming, the maximum amount of preserved positions, while affording those people that actually run these departments the latitude to reallocate their resources appropriately. So that might be a cut because we don't have a need for that anymore, and we have a giant need that ballooned over here. So it might not be a reduction in staff, it might be a cut in an ad, it might be a reduction, I don't know, but I'm not sure. There isn't that statement that there would be, I think it's fair to say there won't be a cut. I think our objective is, as a committee, that we want level services and we want to preserve as many jobs, if not all, as possible.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? Are you talking about in the immediate term, or you're talking about 5 years? Because those are very different things. Or are you saying like the sales pitch of raise your taxes and still have cuts right now is bad?
Correct.
Yes, okay. But I think, Tom, you're talking about just on a move forward, right? That we can't promise that in year 2, 3, 4. You're saying like there's going to be some fluctuation in every year.
In every year and in this year.
Right.
I don't think that you folks know that you can guarantee that there won't be a positional change in your hierarchy.
Right.
And the other aspect is, I mean this regrettably only because I voted 8-0, but PACE's average recommendation is for a reduction. Now it's overwhelmingly towards increase, but we are, I can't do the math real quick, but we're probably now close to 7. Patrick Helen, full disclosure, is also 8-0 override. So we're probably close to 7-1, but there's $1 million reduction. And if you did your math on the sheet, $8 million isn't solved. Like, they still need to reduce other expenses, not just this year, but next year, potentially, depending upon what the new growth ends up being, what the local receipts end up being. I know we're going through some increases now. So I'm with you in spirit. The whole goal for me, because I'm all override, is to preserve as much positions. I just don't know if we could commit. I don't think they would commit to saying that there will be no cuts. I think the goal is to preserve as many jobs as possible.
This is where we are now with the Patrick's 8 put in there.
What about
7.9
Chris's?
total. Chris's change, let's get Chris's change in there.
Yeah, it's going to probably be 7 and 1, give or take.
Just based off of even Chris's comments about it's hard to ask constituents to vote for an override and still cuts are being made within the same year. And quite frankly, I just don't know where cuts are going to come from. I think an 8 solid override.
You'd like all 8 override?
Yep, just for sustainability features. If that's like what we're advocating for is sustainability, then in good conscience, it has to be something like that.
Thank you.
And I'll amend, I think I had said, like, I really thought it was 8, but I feel like saying a little bit below 8's a better number, but optically, but setting that aside, the real number for me is 8.
Okay.
And I still all revenue side, no expense.
Thank you.
Sure.
And recognize that only, depending on the other stuff, that still only gets us to like year 3.
Correct. Yep.
Which is a very painful reality.
Yep.
Anything else?
Tom, I think I said last time, I think the problem is 8, but I thought that we should have cuts. Reconsidering that based on what I'm hearing tonight. However, I think, if my thing was it's 8 and we could take $1 million in cuts and $7 million override, what is $1 million? What's the difference of that? Is that
About
$100? Like, you know what I mean? So I'm sitting here struggling, like, would $1 million or $2 million, is that the number that makes somebody not be? I'm really concerned about the affordability for people, including myself, including all of us. We're all taxpayers. But am I killing myself here with worry over $100 over a year? Like, what's that number really look like?
I mean, the good news is we have a very broad consensus here, that's really good. I think as leaders and as a committee, you should hopefully feel good about that. When you have wild deviations at this point, it usually means there was a fault in your process getting here, and we didn't do a good job looking at the information and really listening to each other. So that's huge. I think your $1 million, if it gives you some peace of mind, it's probably not going to change the average recommendation much. Doesn't make it right or wrong. And again, this is our recommendation. The good news is there are a lot of checks and balances where the community has engagement and opportunities to go to the select board, to go to the budget meeting and hear them out. So there are multiple steps to this process. I think our recommendation is to be as true as we can to the best sustainable path forward and put that forth.
So if I was going to quickly say, if I change Dottie's 6.2 to 7.1, we are now at 7.9 total, 7 and 0.8. So something just rounded wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am willing to go with the full 8. I guess what I'm trying to talk through is for myself and for people that $1 million, it sounds like a lot. It sounds like, wow, $8 million or $7 million. It sounds like a lot, but the actual impact is really not as much as you think in your head.
I think it's aggregate. So just to give you in terms of the overall value, and I want to get to you, Connor, I promise. It's, if this is a 5-year solution, it's $1 million that compounds each year with a 2.5-point delta. Over the course of 5 years, it's, close to $6 million that the community has a chance to work with and sustain services, absorb future increases. I don't see I think we all can agree that the next series of years are most likely not going to be a whole boatload of low inflation experience. It's just a reality that we continue to experience an inflation challenge. I don't fundamentally see it going away. Connor.
So I don't want to turn it into rocket science, but I do, and this maybe provide some relief for the committee members because I'm hearing a real sensitivity of the damage to services people are anticipating from cuts. But we're looking at the $8 million. That's based on a forecast. you and I have spoken about this, but I want the committee to understand, because I don't want the kind of smoke and mirrors conversation come March. We will be refining the baseline here as we move into late February and March. I don't think that's going to fundamentally shift this from like, oh, a $2 million override does it. But I think there's some room to achieve a modest improvement in the gap without immediately resorting to cuts or additional override. So like what I'm hearing is like people say, okay, it's 8, that's based on the preliminary budget. We're going to go to the open house with whatever this aggregate is. There will be not dramatically different, but modestly updated information to update this model, I would think, at least one last time before the committee has to really put pen to paper. I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, different way is that you're all and we all are going to continue to work the problem.
Yep.
It's your job. You're going to give us a budget that balances, and you can't just stop there. You have to hopefully shake trees around insurance. We're going to challenge you on new growth. We're going to ask you to increase fees. And the reality is what we're really asking you is not this year, Connor. It's the fact that we all know when looking at the models, year 3 is not great.
Yeah.
Year 2 is not solved for perfectly. So if you pick up a moderate degree of cushion this year, we're not here to go suck it up. We are a 5-year team that says, glad you kept working the problem. Use that to find ways to fund potential studies on new growth at the industrial park. Okay. I think we'll get to the right phrase of what we want to challenge the town with, that memorandum of understanding. But I think it has to be, we've got to go to the planning committee and talk to them about what, I don't know much what I'm saying, so please, planning committee, I'm not dictating. But what are setbacks? How do we gain access to usable parts of land when there happens to be a small part of the land that prohibits us from using it? How can we increase fees? What are, I'm sure Chief Alexander knows this, but like, what are the ambulance fees? How much do we charge kids for after school things? The solution isn't just we're done with this override.
It's multifaceted in regard to the responses to it.
Yep. No, I appreciate that.
That's good.
I didn't want anyone here to see a budget change memo in 10 days and say, well, you made the problem smaller, right? That's all.
That's good. It helps us get a little bit more runway for the future years of sustainability.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at the time. It's 8:45, but I'm also seeing that we maybe potentially only have one other agenda item, like.
Okay, so everybody's good on feedback?
Oh, I don't mean to cut the conversation off, but.
Yep. No, everybody's good on feedback?
Is there anybody
Does
else?
anybody want to change? Are you tapping Jim in?
I am.
Fair. Tag team.
You're Volun chosen. You remember where you were, Jim? Or
Yes, I do. I would not support passing a full override, which is fine. I don't need to be in consensus as a committee.
You're not the only one.
No, I know.
You're not the only one.
No, I'm okay with that. But to Tom's point and everyone's point, I ran through as much as I thought was reasonable. I even played with the numbers of a bigger override, bigger cuts. We can barely get to. I had made it Prop 3 instead of Prop 2.5 to play with those numbers.
I like it.
The only thing that genuinely gets us to even some sort of level landing field on year 5 is increased growth, which I know is also the longest term and probably hardest solution. But I think even with my numbers not changing, I think there will always need to be cuts just to meet taxpayers where they are. I think we have to get to this, but I think we also have to discuss the fact that at $8 million, what does that impact the average person on top of what we're adding for the public safety building? Like, this is not a few $100s. Some people can just budget out. And I think we have to look at the impact of what are we doing to senior citizens? What are the unintended consequences of if you subsidize a certain group of people? Are there unintended consequences of more people in that group that you do want to live here and be part of the community? What are the impacts of that to the school system? If this town is less affordable for younger families like myself, I would put myself in that category, wanting to start a family. I don't know. I mean, at some point, there's just those questions you have to ask yourself.
Do you think you'll amend your numbers from last week, or are you good? I think it was 6-2, right?
I think, I mean, potentially the numbers I was looking at were like,
You had
yeah,
eight
I guess,
point-
because I increased my override number, but then I also increased my cuts. So it essentially stays the same, I guess.
Okay. Anybody else? Last call for amending prior recommendations.
I'd just like to make a comment. I think the exercise was an interesting exercise in futility. It was an interesting exercise in that no matter the amount of money that we plug in, we still have a significant issue that we're looking at that just outpaces us. And the whole charge that we have is sustainability. And that concerns me because we fix a here and now issue only to have it smoldering somewhere down in our future. And we may only have one opportunity with the public to fix as much as we could. My recommendation was originally 7 million. I could amend it to 8 million. I could amend it higher based on this exercise. But if you're asking me, what recommendation is reasonable given the numbers, I don't know that 7 or 8 change anything. But if it is a consensus and it brings us closer to acting as a board in unity, I can amend it to 8 million. But again, we've got beyond this board, I guess I keep saying it, so you're not hearing it for the first time, we've got to start thinking outside of the box in the future.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just nail you down. You said you could, but what would you like your recommendation to be? It doesn't.
I'll be
either
happy
one.
to amend it to 8 million.
Okay.
Not happy in the sense that I'm happy.
But I do think you raise a really good point that we need to add when we talk about to the residents their tax bill. And this is the notion that Prop 2.5 goes away for a community like Easton. It will never go away. There's a math play. 1/3 of your community is protected. The other 2/3, a large majority is developed with residential forward housing. So there isn't a room to fundamentally, for years to come, solve the inequity that exists with the state revenue formula for residential communities. 72% of our taxes come with a 2.5% annual increase. And you get new growth on top of it, but we all know that's 750,000 average, 900,000 last 3 years, and 1.5 million last year, which was great. But it still doesn't keep up when you have increases to your insurance to 10%. This, in the Boston Globe article, you will read the sentence that says there is a fundamental disconnect of the state asking those cities to foot the bill. So they tell you that. Like, the state, I think we all know this, and I think it's important we communicate it, that we get less unrestricted government aid than we got in 2008.
Not adjusted for inflation.
Non-adjusted, like just dollars, right? We are not getting the road money we used to get. We can't borrow anymore, which we did for 3 years to continue to maintain roads. So we're getting we already read the school. So to your point, one of the travesty would be if people walk away from February 26th and don't understand that at some point in 5, 10 years, whatever that is, you need to or should have the same fiscal conversation. There are communities in our state that every 5 years, it's a matter of fact. You have to have the committee every 5 years. So I'm with you, Denise. I'm not as upset that we won't solve it in perpetuity because we just can't, because the game's rigged against us. Mm-hmm. I will just correct one thing. It's rigged against us because we have a value system that chooses to protect, it plays a role in it, because we don't want to drive through Taco Bell at Five Corners. Like 70 people get on. We know this, but we don't want marijuana in our community that could have given us close to $700,000 of revenue. I respect the residents' vote on that, but again, we have to have ownership for that. I think it's appropriate that we own that as residents in our community. And we love our community. We love Langwater. We love pizza. We love all the great things about Easton. So, but my takeaway, Denise, is we have to educate during 226 that phenomena, that's a reality.
It's not a one-year conversation.
No, the game's rigged against us in terms of what the state aid gives us and what our revenue mechanisms are, and when you compare that to our values.
No, and one of my recommendations and sitting here for these number of meetings is that after PACE disbands, that there is another committee that takes ownership of the direction and attempts to do things like Dr. Cabral at the state level, and some of the other things that individually that we need to open up and have a very hard conversation about.
I like that idea. I'm out.
Because
for
they're
the
not
record,
going away.
but I like that idea.
They're just not going away.
No, it's a great idea.
Advocacy,
Yes, yes.
Political action.
Political
Right.
action, advocacy.
Okay, are we good on the last, again, not opinion-based? Does anybody want to change their numerical answer? Good, checking that off. Multi-year tax impact analysis?
Yes. So, and then, sorry, there's a second side to the agenda, but there's only a few things on it.
Nancy.
That's when we think we're close to the end.
So I guess, Wendy, before you share the screen, what I'd like to do, because Denise brought it up earlier, Dottie brought it up, Tom, it's come up in meetings, and Wendy and I, hearing the feedback from the community, we're thinking about how do we inform a 5-year tax forecast, right? And it would certainly make our conversation easier, and for the 15 people who are still hanging on Zoom, I appreciate you. For us to just show in a vacuum, every 1 million is roughly $111, and just go with that, right? And that wouldn't be untrue, right? That is the marginal increase, but we want to make sure that with the best information we have, we show what we think is a reasonable expectation of what taxes look like in the next 5 years for the median house if we do nothing, based on just a 2.5% levy increase, right? And the existing debt exclusions that voters have approved in 23, in 19, and ones that are starting to come off the levy soon that were approved in 05. So before we do that calculator, because the building project come up, I'd like to have Wendy put a few slides up so I could talk about that, because that's important. So is that okay?
Let's do it.
Cool.
It's on my screen, but I don't know how to share.
There you go. So you can tell I made this today because it's awful in black and white, no graphics, but I think it's really important that right out of the gate, I'll speak for myself and the board, that we recognize the timing on this is terrible, and none of us are happy with that. Whether it's inflation, the general cost of living people are dealing with, that we have 8 or 9 union contracts expiring, this is a tough set of circumstances to come on the heels of 2 debt exclusions. But I think we can acknowledge that and should acknowledge that, and we also need to talk about some important factual pieces that I'd like to go through. So can you go to the next slide? So one of the things that comes up, and we've touched on it earlier, but there's folks who are watching, and Chris brought it up, there are folks who say, well, we've just had this override or that override. To be clear, and not to be pedantic, that there is a distinction. We have not had an operating override since 2006. So we've gone 19 years without one, which for a primarily residential community that receives roughly 1% increases to education funding from the state every year, that's a remarkably long run. We have, and voters in Easton have been very generous, not just in the past 5 years, but historically for decades now, in passing numerous debt exclusions. And so there's a difference between a debt exclusion and an override. A debt exclusion is when you increase the tax levy and therefore your taxes for a very specific purpose, which is to pay for the bonds for a building project or a capital project. These, not just in Easton, but around the state, generally are much more politically successful at the ballot box than an operating override because it's concrete, it's super specific, and it's finite. Although you're talking decades, the increase is commensurate with whatever the debt service, the principal and interest actuals end up being. And then when that debt's paid off, that increase goes away. So I think that's a more tangible, direct thing voters can feel more comfortable with than an operating override, which is distinct, that it's a permanent increase forever. For operations, which I think are generally, and if anyone here disagrees, tell me, but generally more amorphous for people than a building, particularly one that they could use or their kids can use. So one of the questions that comes up is we've raised taxes for these building projects. should we have not done that? And can't we use that money for the operating deficit? And the answer to the latter is no, you cannot, right? Just like CPA revenue can't be redirected into the school budget, the debt service revenue for the fire station portion of these projects cannot be taken away from that building and put into the fire department operations, right? So that's important. It's very recent, right? We've had Blanche Ames, we've had police, fire, public works facilities since 2019, and I'm saying this in sincerity. I know it's true for me, Dr. Cabral, and everyone here. We really appreciate that voters have trusted us to do those projects. I also appreciate, and we were asked while we were going through these process, well, what about the operating budget? And at the time, we were making it work. And just in the 18 months since that fall 2023 approval for the building project, we've seen healthcare go up $2 million. We've seen pension assessments go up $1 million. We've seen other insurances go up 19%, and we've seen regional school assessments go up 40%. But I think the history here and the timing is important. So Easton voters have been very generous. They've approved numerous debt exclusions that have gotten the entire school campus in pretty amazing shape. In roughly 95, it's hard to pull the exact records, they approved RO. That was paid off and came off the tax levy in fiscal 18. In 2005, voters approved the OA high school and repairs to EMS. I think that was roughly $83 million, which if you adjust that for inflation is about $140 million in today's dollars. And then they approved an operating override the very next year, which was very generous of them. There was not then another debt exclusion until 2019. There was an attempted override in 2016, which was overwhelmingly rejected. And we then moved towards other opportunities. We cut positions. We adopted more austere budgets. We started aggressively building our reserves. And as opportunities presented themselves, and this is really important because, again, like, I'm not going to try and tell anyone the timing here is good. There's probably no one in Easton less excited about all of these things happening in a 5-year window than me. But these are not annual challenges. These are not building projects that in the summer of 2023, myself or a member of the select board woke up and said, I want to go ask people for $150 million this fall. And the history there is really important. So how we actually perform matters too. So Wendy, if you could go to the next slide, please. I touched on most of this, but I really want to reemphasize, you cannot, no matter how severe a given year's operating challenges become, reroute that exempt debt towards the levy. The cost of those bonds is outside of a levy on both sides, on the expense and revenue. So they necessarily do not have an impact on your operating position, except the arguable one that it improves your operating position because you eventually get to a point when you move to these new facilities that you are not throwing good money after bad, spending 80% of your annual R&M budgets, which we've established are already underfunded, on putting fires out in buildings that are 75, 80 years old, spending R&M funds on a building that even if you could make it mint condition would just be an antique, doesn't change that it's 1/3 the size, doesn't change that none of the equipment used today can fit in it. That said, it is true, I think people here are sensitive to it, and I don't want to shy away from it. While it doesn't have it's not contributory to the deficit, right? So when people say, we just approved an override for police, fire, public works, how do we have this big deficit? Those things are not related. The operating deficit is driven by operating pressures that, as we've established, yes, there is wage pressures in schools and town budgets, but the large, real change in the past 18 months has been things like health insurances, pensions, et cetera. But this does impact the tax bill, and therefore, of course, is going to weigh heavily on any person's personal financial calculation of, does an operating override make sense in my life, right? And so none of this is me saying that's not true. That is true. I don't think anyone here would contest that, and I'm certainly not going to say that that's not the case. So we need to recognize and own that challenge. But I also think it's important that we talk about how have we performed, right? Because that's a fair, I don't want to say criticism because that sounds negative, that's a fair critique of like, wow, this is not good timing.
I think we need to add that to your presentation.
I'm thinking of this as he's talking. Yes.
And so that's fair to question that and say, did you have your priorities straight, right?
This is a good history.
And those projects were approved by voters, in some cases narrowly, like police, fire, public works, because we laid out a case based on the facts that these buildings were in a irreparable condition that was unacceptable for first responders and public works. And that was true then. It is still true today. And had we reversed the order, the exact same critique would still stand, right? Except now the building project budget would probably be 170. So that doesn't mean this isn't a fair criticism, but I think the history showing that there have been sometimes back to back, not even a 2-year gap. It's also important to note that in 2019, when Blanche James was approved, in fall of 19, by January of 20, the town and school leadership were meeting publicly, at that point only 4 years in the wake of a failed override that was attempting to deal with many of the challenges that have now exacerbated and grown, to talk about, okay, we need to have this conversation with the public, and that got shelved because the pandemic hit and the world kind of ended for a period of time. So those are all fair criticisms, that's real, and we expect people to cost that in, and that's why when Wendy and I built the tax model for you, we did put all of that in. It certainly would make it look better to say, oh, here's just the override cost, and don't look at the things that are already happening. So we will get there. But if we accept the premise that we're going to be self-critical of the timing, and that's okay, then we also need to look at our actual performance. So if you could go next slide, Wendy. What I'm showing here is what did we forecast to voters at the time that they voted to approve these projects, as far as the total project cost, what the impact on the rate would be, and what it would cost your median homeowner per year, and how did we perform? Obviously, the police, fire, public works is not constructed yet, but the contract is awarded. So from a technical perspective, your question, can it be delayed? Theoretically, before we did that, but no, it is going to proceed. And we'll talk about that. The estimate that voters approved for the budget of Blanche James was $95 million. The tax rate is there. And the estimate that we showed people for what we thought it would cost you once it was fully borrowed was $433 a year. The actual performance, in the same night, Monday, that we awarded the police, fire, public works construction at $9 million under budget so far, we closed out the final change order for Blanche James, and the actual cost was $82 million, which is $13 million under budget, which is 17% under budget. What that translates to is that the actual annual cost of that project is $285 a year on the median tax bill. This is not me saying, therefore, that doesn't cost money, and for some people that is not real and painful, but that matters. So it's 34% less than what we forecasted. The performance at that time, and when we went for Blanche James, just as when we went for the police, fire, and public works, and it is a perennial and it is always a legitimate question, is now the right time? I think if we're being honest, there is never a good time to ask for a tax increase, right? And Easton has gone 19 years trying not to on the operating side. But that performance matters, and the actuals were doing so well that we actually accelerated the debt from 30 to 20 years on about 28% of that principal while achieving that annual savings as well. So the debt is going to decrease faster for a large portion of that project and save multiple millions in interest as well. And if you can go to the next slide, Wendy. We are now at the point where the construction has been bid and awarded for the police, fire, public works project. This text is like size 6, so I just want to touch again on that history.
It doesn't look that way on my screen.
It's not, yeah, it is, the vote in 2023 didn't come out of the year 2023. The town funded a comprehensive facilities assessment back in 2014 to quantify the specific repair and replacement needs of all of our town and school buildings at that time. That was part of how we got into the MSBA pipeline in 2017, originally only to fix Center School. And the MSBA thankfully said, if you can make a case and your voters support it in feasibility, we will replace all 3 schools at once. And thank God we did. But that was a hard decision at the time. So that was the Blanche James was approved 2019. In 2019, the Municipal Building Committee, which is a committee of your neighbors, recommended replacement of all police, fire, and public works building. That got put on the shelf for a year because COVID hit, and then voters approved feasibility funding for that project in 2021. And we had a public deliberative process where we looked at alternatives, looked at what was the most cost-effective way to get there, and that's what we put in front of voters in 2023. The bid actuals have come in. So there's a little bit more detail because I'm going to say TBD once complete. I'm not going to guess what the total project cost will be because that would be tempting fate. But what I'm showing here is the estimate that we gave voters at approval in 2023 for a total project budget of about $150 million. And within there, $116 million of that was the estimated project construction cost. We now have bid actuals and have awarded a contract, and it's $107 million, which is $9 million under, which is positive, right? That's almost 8% below what we were carrying. At that time, we were carrying more conservative interest cost estimates for, I think, fair reason, and we're still trying to be pretty conservative there. But we were estimating that the tax rate impact once OA comes off, because this isn't going to be fully borrowed until 27 or 28, and OA will come off the ledger kind of at the same time, that the net impact on your tax rate would be $1.37, and right now, based on those bid savings, it's closer to 97 cents. The median net increase we forecast once it's fully borrowed, we forecast it at 719, and right now, based on those bid savings, it's looking closer to 628. That is not a small number, but it's important that when we're talking about the burdens of these projects, that we look at how they're performing and what our track record is there. That figure, of course, assumes that all of those bid savings don't go to any change orders, which of course there will be, but that larger 150 number also still has project contingency in it. And just as Blanche James did, any construction project ought to. With a debt exclusion, when the project closes out, whatever bid savings remain and whatever contingency is unspent, we have to give back with a lower tax cut. And that's what we've done on big projects. That's what we will work extremely hard to do on this one. I know that timing is terrible, but this is a 75-year investment. And it is not going to go away. And again, do I wish that the timing wasn't what it was? Yes, but my speaking notes, the few ones I had are here. I mean, part of this conversation with the community leading into 2023 was that construction costs have grown out of control, and every year we wait, it just gets worse. So none of this is to say, Wendy, if you can go to the last slide, that this isn't expensive, but it is important that the cumulative forecasted tax increase that voters approved for these two projects, based on our initial projections, was $11.52, and today, based on the actual performance of Blanche James and where we are with the bid savings on the public safety, public works, it's about 21% lower than that. That is still a meaningful number. That is a lot. But what is represented in that $913 is replacing every single police, fire, and public works facility in Easton. It is replacing 3 elementary schools. The output of these projects is, again, really appreciated that voters trusted us. These are investments that will pay dividends for the children in Easton, for the first responders of Easton, and the people that they take care of for long after all of us are here. Mm-hmm. So I hope this is helpful information. I'm happy to put it online. We know this is a tough question. If someone here says, well, I still think you're full of it, that's terrible, that's okay, please tell me. Again, none of this is for me to say. That doesn't mean that's expensive. That doesn't mean there's not a burden. And that's $900 that in a vacuum, had those projects not happened, that's an $8 million override, right?
But also, if I say to myself, what am I willing to pay? That's $76 a month. It's still a number. But if somebody said to me, for $76 a month, you're going to get a brand new school, you're going to get new police, fire, DPW, you're going to have all these improvements that are going to last you for 75 years, that feels better and easier for me to look at and see that number. I can find a way to come up with $76 a month.
I also look at it from a business perspective too, and I appreciate that you use words like generous, but I will say I also look at it as an investment. And what we often don't share is how much you wiped out on the repairs and maintenance and the capital millions of dollars that have gone away from trying to solve. So again, that's just my value equation of a return on investment to you, Dottie. I appreciate the number, that's what makes it real for me. But to me, I think it's smart. It's the largest asset most people have to preserve the value of the town is good. Nancy, I think you had a
I just have
comment
one
that you
question.
want to make.
You said public safety is a 75-year investment. I just want to be clear when I explain this to people, meaning we'll carry that debt for 75 years, that it is expected to last for 75 years.
These are
Thank
50
you.
to 75-year builds.
Thank
They
you.
are-
I just
they-
want to make sure I
No,
have that
that's a
right.
fair- That's a fair question. These are 30-year notes.
I'd like to say to Connor that I think that if you can condense this in 2 to 3 minutes.
Sure.
This needs.
That's going to be on my gravestone. He's still talking down there.
You know what I love, Connor, is
Just
that
think
was your name
elevator.
on the bingo card, not mine this time.
No, it'll be both of us.
No, I'm not there today.
No, condensing it somehow, some way into 2 to 3 minutes, and it is absolutely critical, 100%, that it's presented with the open house.
I agree. I think it's excellent.
It's
Excellent.
like it's without measure that it is the biggest elephant in the room that people are
Yeah.
asking. Now, maybe my inbox is just showing it, but I'm going to tell you that I think that outside there they're asking this question. So
It's one of the first
No,
questions
we
I
get
get
it
as
too.
well.
Right.
I've got
Yep.
it over the weekend.
okay, so maybe we can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to
Throw
put
this-
that straight online, and people can probably read that in 2 to 3 minutes
Right.
without my history lesson.
We'll take it, and we'll put some color to
Yeah,
it as well,
and-
Denise.
I mean, that's
being,
good news.
you know, like being said by Connor gives it kind of. I'm not taking anything away from you guys.
It's okay.
It lends a little bit of credibility to, hey, listen, you know, we realize that this isn't great timing.
We can also put the link to this and tell people, go in 3 hours and 15 minutes to
Well, you could
to
share
where
to a,
the
you
conversation
could
starts.
share to a timestamp with
Yeah.
YouTube that goes
We could
straight
get
to
you
it.
an ECAT video for just a few minutes if you wanted to get your own little YouTube channel going.
Okay.
Just
No,
for his
all right.
face.
Are we good on that? So next,
Anyone here have any
It's excellent.
questions or feedback on it?
good job. Oh, sorry, please.
You call that YouTube channel like he's still talking.
I love
There
it.
you go.
No, all joking aside, I think that the last 15 to 20 minutes, you've already said it, has to be present.
Appreciate it.
And I think the home run ball really is, I can appreciate, you know, the making people aware of what cuts would have to be made, and really, you know, cluing them in, cluing the common Easton resident into how scary it would be if we didn't have these things, right? If all the cuts that would have to be made, the people who lose their jobs and the services that we lose. But I think really the home run ball is, okay, if we can get this over passed, this is what will happen as a result. You know, you're comparing these two things, it's like, okay, this is what happens if we don't, but this is what happens if we do. And I think that, you know, this is what happens if we do, presenting that case actually carries more weight. And I think people knowing that information, saying, okay, look, I know you want to spend this money. I'm kind of on the fence about it, but tell me, what is the benefit going to be? And then you sell them on that versus sell them on the scary part.
If I could, how unglamorous, so a few minutes if you'll indulge, how unglamorous is it, in a way we've already answered that question, but I know it doesn't sound good, which is we're working to sustain level services. It's like putting a new roof on.
Sure.
Like I come home and I guess for a week I'm like, it's a new roof, but I still go, it doesn't change anything. So I'm not,
You're supposed to have a roof.
right, like I'm not, but that's what that's what we're communicating, is that this is what you need just to keep what you have. That's what this override doesn't get us dramatic increases in the number of teachers, police, fire,
It's not so much
or
increase,
services.
what gets us out of a jam and keeps us out of a jam.
That's what this is. That's the, right,
Yeah.
sustainable.
But I want to know, and I think, you know, I won't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people would want to know, look, just tell me what gets us out of a jam and keeps us out of a jam, so that next year you're not knocking on our door saying, look, we need more money.
Agreed.
Or in 3 years, hey, we need more money.
So
Yep.
I think that's great
That's the
feedback.
take.
That's part of some of this is, and again, for the 11 of you, I still see you on Zoom. There's the immediate, like this July, to be dealt with, but one of the things that we're going to talk about nailing down tonight as well is what are the multi-year commitments back to the voters of, we won't ask for a debt exclusion for X years, right? Perhaps that's part of it, to your point. I don't know if you find that valuable. That's okay. So that's so there's the immediate, and then how do we make that work for a few years?
Okay. So just looking at the agenda real quick, I know we still have to do the multi-year tax impact, so we'll do that next. I do want to look at, just plan ahead for tonight. So the consensus on the size of the immediate financial challenge and split of revenue, we talked about. So I think we're good on that. The proactive or improvement override is a discussion we'll have briefly, but I don't think it's a large debate. And then the reaching consensus on the long-term policy recommendations for FY26 and beyond, that community covenant or compact, I'd like that to be actual homework unless somebody has a strong aversion, meaning I'd like you to, I will circulate, I found 4 of them, I believe. I'll circulate them so you can see what other towns and communities did just to start the idea generation. Then I would just ask you to specify it for Easton. Like there might be things in there that don't apply to Easton, and there might be things in Easton that should apply for that. And that'll be your homework. And when we gather after the 226 meeting, that first meeting, we should really have that list of the memorandum and covenants that we would look at. So maybe at least please give your top 5, maybe. That would be super helpful. And if you could send them to Nancy, that would be great. And we'll do the same thing. We'll consolidate them down for the benefit of the public. In override communities that have put forth overrides, they've made types of commitments like what Connor alluded to. We make a commitment to not seek a debt exclusion override for X number of years unless there is a compelling safety reason or this amount of public number of votes indicating they want the issue raised. So that's just one example. Same thing on operational override. You agree not to come back for X number of years unless 1,000 residents sign a petition for it to come back. So there are, the list is long. It could for us, one of the things we've talked a lot about is we want to do studies for the Easton Industrial Park and support how that could be developed in a meaningful way to increase new growth. Same thing with our planning and zoning rules and regulations. How do we maintain the inimitable qualities of Easton while also encouraging new growth and creating new opportunities to build? So those are just examples. So if we could, Wendy, if you want to give us the tax calculator, Nancy's desperately trying to make sure we get out of here before 10 so that she can ring the bell, but let us know if how we can go through this tax impact.
I just need to share my screen again.
That's Dottie.
So while that's getting
The
shared.
last time it
here you
just
go.
went up on its own.
There you go.
Oh, Joe's
Oh, you're
the
there.
best. Joe doesn't want me
Appreciate
touching
you, Joe.
anything.
You are. Thank you.
So this tax impact analysis and calculator is set up. Initially, the beginning part of this is a projection of what the tax levy would look like with or without an override. You could plug in an override amount up at the top, and it will project out what the tax levy looks like. There's some assumptions in there. Obviously, it is a projection. Doesn't mean it's going to be set in stone. It's our best estimate at this point, with some assumptions for new growth in the future. If you'd like, I can plug in. Want to give me a dollar amount? I can plug it in and
Yeah, you can
see what happens.
Why don't
put
we
in,
start with the 8? We're at
put in
specifically
7
7.9 is where we are right now with our.
but the operational override 7 million, I believe. You can use that as a round number.
And so what that does is it puts the override in here on this particular line, and it shows the increase with the 2.5% every year. The reason that we factored that out is because we want to also separate that out to show you what the existing tax increases would be without the override. So you know there are going to be some tax increases anyway. Right below this, it just shows kind of how your taxes break down with the tax rate. So right now, our tax rate for residential is $12.48. 79 cents of that is for the existing debt exclusion, and we're projecting that that will increase to $1.27, $1.73, level out at $1.70 in the future. And then the impact of the operational override, once you plug that $7 million in, would be $1.19 the first year, and then it goes up a little bit incrementally for that 2.5% increase.
Mhm.
So what that looks like down here for the average single family, so if you put in, you can put in any amount here, you can put in your own home value, see how that would impact you. This is the median single family value. And so this first part in the yellow shaded area shows the baseline. So these are the increases that we would forecast the taxpayers to pay based on existing debt exclusions that have already been passed by voters. So it's basically just your base tax levy, and that is projected to increase with the additional debt as it comes on for the facilities project to be $583 the first year, $576. Then it will level off a little bit more, coincidentally with the sunsetting of the debt for the school project away. Okay. So those would be your typical increases. Down here, in the more darker yellow, is the impact of the override. So $7 million override comes out to be about $771 a year for the first year, and that's about 9.54%. And then every year after it goes up a little bit by that 2.5%. So, and then this is just the total of what the total tax bill would be for the year.
And when you scroll up again, you can see that, nope, sorry. You can fit both the existing baseline at the top of that screen and the new baseline based on the override number, right? So scroll a couple more cells down, right? So that's your existing baseline. That's starting at about 86.68 for your median home. And then the dark yellow one at the bottom is if there's an override of 7 million, what that baseline changes to over 5 years.
Does that include the public safety building?
Yes, that includes everything that has been approved to date, plus an assumed 2.5% increase as well.
Sure.
So this is a conservative forecast that I think it's fair to say portrays this as adverse to your jobs as possible, right? Like this is we're not just saying $7 million is $771. We're showing that you could reasonably expect for the median next year to be 581 already. So it's both of those. So instead of for fiscal 26, you're looking at 8,600, you're looking at 94, right? And that's meaningful over time. But particularly in that first year. That's a real distinction between an operating override and debt exclusions. Debt exclusions usually come onto the levy spread out over multiple years. Operating overrides are all at once.
So I think the information is here on what I was hoping to present from a detailed impact to the resident. I'll probably take it out of its grid format and just make it more consumable. And then on that slide, I do want to compare it against the comparable communities as well so that people can understand, hey, here's what other people are paying for taxes, here's what their home value is, here's what their income is, and here's how you can kind of normalize it for percent of income and percent of tax bill.
The only challenge of that is we don't know what the 5-year forecasts are for those towns.
No, I understand. I'm
Fair
going to
enough.
use just the current,
Okay.
and so I can gross it up.
Yep.
I won't be able to tell what all the other communities are doing for operational overrides.
And debt exclusions.
But I can give us now and what next year looks like.
Yep.
And then agreed, we'll give them the 5-year run rate
Yep.
of their taxes, because I think it's important people see that some of the items are rolling off. And that way it helps understand what their bill is.
I mean, it's interesting that even at the 5-year projection, that 11,000 is still less than that other neighboring town that was higher than that this first year. Right? Didn't we have somebody at 13?
Sharon. Yes.
So I think that's kind of interesting, and that's with debt exclusion and everything.
Well, and
Yes
I think
or
it's
no?
fair to say, I think one of the messages the board got was something to the effect of comparing the town services to Sharon, and it's like that's Sharon's a great community, but their tax bill is $5,000 higher than ours right now. That is a enormous swing. And to Nancy's point, even what we're forecasting 5 years out, if we did an override, less. That doesn't mean that's not a lot of money, but that's, I do think some people, when they're thinking from a service perspective, are thinking, what communities do we want our services to compete with? And it's really important to be thinking about, well, what do those tax bills look like? What do those residential versus commercial bases look like? And then it comes back to that value question and that affordability question, right? And that's, I can't stress enough, and it's the same as we've told folks with our building projects, that's a deeply personal question. If people can't afford it, then they can't afford it, and they can and they should vote no.
No doubt. Any questions on the spreadsheet?
Yeah, can you just put in 8,000, don't touch anything, and let's see what the 943990 looks like?
You mean 8
I mean,
million?
8 million?
Should be 9550, right?
Wow, look at you.
So-
Do you work in finance?
Maybe.
So it's like a,
$111 for every million.
yeah. So what does it look like if we go to 9 million?
Another $111. 961.
I mean, when you're talking about like, we're looking at this is the amount of money that's going to give us level services. There's not going to be anything proactive. Is that the word the schools look at? A proactive.
Well, I think,
I mean, would putting $1 million on, raising it $100, would that be proactive? Like, are we going to look at a third or?
Well, I think the next article talks about whether or not we want to entertain a proactive stance. I'm not sure we're ready to understand how the $1 million would be allocated, so I don't know where it goes if it creates proactive. I think it's a fair question. It's kind of the next bullet point if you want to enter that discussion.
Yeah.
could I offer one thing? One option to consider, and this, again, starts to make this already complicated thing a little bit trickier, but I want to put it on the table for the committee to think about, is it's something communities have done. We could, obviously the goal of PACE is how do we get on a sustainable track for 5 years. You could, as part of a proposal, recommend, looking at, I'm thinking like the exempt debt is increasing in this year, and now we're contemplating putting an override, an operating override, and that's kind of a double hit. You could tap a reasonable amount of reserves to pay down a portion of that bond in that 1 year to smooth out the increase over 2 years. That's an option. I just want to.
That's fair. I heard, as a finance guy, I get exactly what you said. It's relatively complex to introduce that principle for the general consumption of the average resident to navigate leveraging your savings account to smooth. I don't disagree with it. I would probably argue you might need to use that stabilization fund for other reasons as well as you go through.
Yes,
for mitigation.
we do have a specialized capital stabilization fund as well that I would think perhaps might be.
Could be.
So I just want to put that on the table, not to make it more complicated.
So next bullet point is talking about, so we already have our recommendation. Again, thank you, team. Next bullet point was just a discussion because it had come up. Do we want to put forth to the residents of our community what a proactive budget looks like?
We'd have to start studying all over again, because what is proactive? How much is proactive? What is going to be proactive? So you'd have to start all over again.
So you say no.
No, I'm not saying no, I'm saying it's a lot of work.
So I do just want to offer that the schools track, like, what are the programmatic differences, and it would be some work, but like on the town side, we could pull together in relatively short order, and would largely be like public safety, public works focused. It's doable, at least for the,
Every year, the school department, we show the school committee, these are reactive needs that we need right now.
Mm-hmm.
These are proactive needs that the staff is recommending. These are strategic needs that we could do. and then I show we're always in reactive. But those things are already there, and we would have to just quantify.
Right, I'm sure both sides have all of that stuff, but then it's got to be given to us, and we have to look at it the same way we looked at sustainable, right? And so, is proactive actually sustainable? Is that the definition of what we're after for sustainable? That's building on, that's above sustaining, that's creating another town. Not
So
town, but.
the value I see is that there are some people who have reached out and said, I actually want to hire override than the dollar amounts that you're talking about.
I couldn't hear you.
So there are people that have reached out and have said, I actually want to hire override. And the benefit, if we did pursue this, would be that we would be giving the choice, we would be presenting the choice at town meeting to say, here's our recommendation, here's what a bit brighter looks like, and here's what not doing anything looks like.
So what you're suggesting is to come up with, we're coming up with two options. This is what's gonna happen if we don't do anything. This is what's gonna happen if we do this. And so you're saying, let's do a third one. If we're gonna do this, why don't we also look at up over here, which would be what'd you call it? Proactive.
Right. So
Is that
yeah,
what you wanna
I'm
do?
just asking the team if they feel that we should consider developing a proactive model that I'm not asking to have another 20 meetings, Chris. I think that we may good, right? And look, I'm not advocating for it. My job is to raise these issues for this committee to opine on. So if everybody's like, I'm good, I did my job, I checked my box, and when somebody in the community asks me, I can say, we talked about it. Thank you for raising it. We talked about it, and the committee felt that, no, we had it pretty dialed in.
I would be in favor of, again, a very simple, streamlined version of that exercise. And it's bringing me back to when I was at the state school committee conference. We had attended a session that was on operational overrides and strategies that communities that have passed them successfully have used. And one of those strategies was to show, this is what, and I think they might have used cars as the analogy, but this is what a solid late-ish model Honda Accord looks like in our budget. This is the Cadillac or the Mercedes or whatever, and this is the car that's breaking down every day, right? And kind of translating it to that and saying, okay, what do we as a community expect and want from the services that we offer? Does it feel like a trusty, comfortable Accord or Camry that you get in every day, you turn the key, it starts or whatever? Or do you want something that has more amenities and bells and whistles, et cetera? And if you decided that that's what we want to strive for as a community, that's what that looks like. Another consideration could be also bookending that we know that, 8 million, 7 million, whatever, is if you just run these projections, it's getting us back into the red at around year 3. If we wanted to be comfortably out of the red for full 5 years, that's what 10 looks like. 10 gets you there. So maybe it's proposing that again as sort of a benchmark for an upper limit. So anyway, that's from those two perspectives, I think it could be a worthwhile exercise.
Appreciate it. Jim and then Denise.
I guess it would truly depend on what we possibly even thought the money would be spent on. If you think hiring more people to add to the insurance costs of the town is what we're going to spend this money on, that's a non-starter for me. Like those are the costs, like we've said. So if we're going to hire more administrators, we're going to hire more whoever it is, like that's just not going to work. If we want to talk about ways we can find ways to increase efficiency with the existing town employees, through training, I'm not saying a Doge committee by any means, but like increasing their use of the tools and the productivity per employee, I'm open to that sort of thing. If we're talking about fully funding road paving and maintenance of our infrastructure, that's something I'm interested in talking about. But we've talked all this time about how 85% of the costs are people. And like that's the key here is like, I don't think it's sustainable to continue adding to the number of people who work for this town when the population's not increasing. when you look at even student population numbers, and they are stable / decreasing. I mean, there are serious considerations here that, like, at least for me personally, are just no-goes with that type of conversation. So,
Denise?
I'd like to explore it as an option because I think that we are, the motivation and the goal of this board is sustainability, and our models are showing as we project out that we may not have the sustainability. And so I think that it's an exercise that we need to venture. It may or may not be a recommendation, but I think that we have an obligation to the citizens to say that we've kind of run it out for some sustainability. And we question, there's a lot of question going on. I mean, there's an awful lot. Is the federal government going to give to the state? Is the state going to give to the local? Are the numbers that we have going to be actuals? Or are they going to, have some real sway? So I think that it's an exercise that we need to at least broach. We may not formally spend an infinite amount of time, but I think it's...
raise your hands, people that don't want to do it. Okay.
I think.
Could I make
I
a
think,
suggestion?
Sure.
I'm split in the middle on it, to be perfectly honest with you, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise. I don't think it's worth investing the time that we've been investing.
Right, yeah.
So
Agreed.
towards the ends of our meet, it's not going to change what we're going to be putting forth towards the town of Easton as far as recommendations. I don't think. So it's just another box check that we were being thorough. That said, towards the end of our meetings, if there's time, and Alicia and Connor can do something quick and something to say that we did investigate that, I think that's great. Otherwise, I think we move on.
My recommendation would be that we have to have their feedback to you. I was with you 110%. After that 226 meeting, we have one meeting. We would have to, you get 30 minutes to present each, roughly, because we have to nail down the actual presentation that we're going to be giving to the select board. So Connor, what are your
I mean, I guess what I don't, and Tom, correct me wrong, I don't think you're saying, do we want to go for a different number to recommend to the public? I think there's a consensus number that there's been a tremendous amount of time spent on. But do we want to, if for no other reason, for benchmarking and showing people, because there are people who would look at that and say, like, okay, well, if I'm going to pay $900 more to keep things the same, I would pay $12 to have things get better. That doesn't mean PACE recommends that, but you could demonstrate, well, if we wanted to not just sustain, right? We have the solve it through cuts, which is balanced budget we have to produce. We have PACE's recommendation of stability, and then there's this third number of if people wanted this, that's a choice, but not maybe one PACE recommends. I don't, is that?
Yeah, no, so PACE will have one, I think we have to have the one recommendation.
Okay.
I think what we're just trying to do is to give to the audience who is saying, I want more. I don't, first of all, I don't think it's 25,000 people, right? Like, so it's not the whole town.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking if the committee wants to put a one-pager together that says, look, if, for those of you that want to invest more, here's what that would look like.
Well, here's one thing that concerns me. We've asked everyone to do homework to identify some of these covenances or things. Well, if we only go for the 8 million and that's the only option, we cannot say to the town, and we promise not to come back to you in 5 years for another override. Whereas we might feel we can say that on the 11, 10, whatever that other figure is. To me, that is an option.
It's a debate.
We're talking about two different things, right? One is about changing the level of service, and one is about keeping the level of service and sustainability. I think that needs to be vetted out. Those are two very different things.
They're very different things.
Good point.
Yep.
So then, no.
I'm sensing a no.
Not worth the time.
Right, we're at the end of our finish line. It's complicating the scenario. I'm sure what we can do is direct people, if there was, to the slides that are already presented of what that looks like on the school side. And I'm sure, Connor, you could articulate some viewpoints.
We could have some data points if people ask us that at
Sure.
PACE.
Can those people donate to the town?
Yeah.
If we pay more taxes?
So, like, Jim, with all due respect, I'm not saying that we should do this lightly. But that is just as there are people who strongly want no override, there are people who would say, is there, and one of the things we've heard, I think it's come up here repeatedly, is giving choice to people. I'm not trying to say, hey, you guys got it 8, make it 12. I'm not saying I would recommend that. It's really just going through the intellectual exercise, and perhaps it's what you're talking about. Maybe it's more capital spend. I don't know. If this was
It would
not.
make more sense if it's, because our charge is sustainability, it would make more sense if you're offering a choice because of sustainability, not necessarily for increases.
So I'm gonna
Fine.
say we're done.
Yeah.
We're going no on that particular. But thank you for indulging the question. We can at least say we talked about it. The last item is the consensus on the long-term policy recommendations. This is what we talked about, which is we'll share with you what other towns have done. And then if you folks could forward 5 or top 10, whatever it is, to Nancy, we'll try to do the, we'll give everybody's reply, but we'll also try to thread the common themes. And then that can be the basis for when we get together after February 26th for what our recommendation would be for a memorandum of understanding or a covenant. Again, it's our recommendation. That's not something we could mandate gets implemented.
Sorry, or if the goal is to have, like, if there are common threads, that some of these are up on screen for folks on the 26th, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's why we're going to do homework. Get it to us as soon as you can over the next week or so. And that way, oh, sorry. Did you say on the 26th?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if this will be presented on the 26th. We won't have a chance to meet together as a team to say that's what we agree on.
Are we at least going to say we also understand that we would then owe you commitments on things in this?
So PACE has to recommend sustainable monies. We don't have to solve, and I think we can recommend a memorandum of understanding by doing homework and we're diligent, but we're not, that's something that I think the select board can hash out in all their meetings, and the budget committee can say, here's what that memorandum looks like based upon, I mean,
But
we're
can we
not
say
voting
that
for that.
exercise is going on? You know, there's an exercise to identify these
Yeah.
things. We'll,
Sorry, what?
I don't know. I thought from previous conversation that PACE was going to, like, at least give some like high level. We think these are things worth the regulatory committees and people doing, not like it has,
Yeah, we
getting
are.
into the nut. Okay,
I think
so
we said the same thing, just not for 226.
But we will acknowledge to those folks that that is part of this too.
That we are looking at making sure that we have a recommendation to hold ourselves accountable.
Like
Yes.
a community compact.
Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Could this be something that Jim was talking about as that activity? Is like what would make you likely to vote for an override? Like what would your contingencies be? What would your covenants be?
maybe that's on that survey with the
Could be.
QR code.
Yeah, we could do a
You know, there's
survey.
3 questions on that, gives 3 very simple questions, and maybe that's
The hard
one of
part
them.
is asking them the question without giving them all of the knowledge and information and examples. Meaning, to be honest, I don't think everybody on our committee knows what those 4 towns wrote in terms of their compact. I'm not sure everybody on our committee appreciates that you have to have discretion. Like, you can't just say, great, I'll do this, but the schools can't increase their budget by more than 1% next year. Like, you can't. You have a negotiation that's going on. So giving open-ended questions to residents, I just get nervous that when they give us their reply and we're like, that's a non-starter. Like, I'm so sorry, but let's spend 4 hours to talk so I can help you understand that there are fundamental lanes of increase of tenure at teachers that, right? Like, but
They check boxes that would, like, if we are doing this for homework anyway, and we haven't come to a consensus yet as a group, but if we gave them the list of things that, hey, as a group, we've said this, so they're not giving us their answers, but they're like, oh, that sounds good, I would check that off.
sure, I'm reticent to say we could do that all via email without getting us all back. Well, so I don't want to put 20 things on there and somebody here is like, I hate those 5 things. I wanted a chance to say why those 5 things are not right. I would just be, so I'm not saying no, absolutely not. Trying to be thoughtful about what the potential pitfalls might be while trying to do the right thing.
Isn't there still space for us, like, to acknowledge this will be a part of the final report in March, and then at that meeting on the 5th, we have to put pencils down on the dollar amounts, but also, like, here's big picture stuff as
Yeah.
well.
Where I was just thinking was, I wonder if we come together as a team afterwards and we offer to hold a listening session on Zoom. That's one of our question and answers. and we distribute it publicly. It gets used by the committees and the boards, and we make ourselves available for an hour twice over 2 weeks to say, if you have questions on this or feedback, let us know. But we need to know because the select board's getting together on this date. I'm wondering if that might be helpful, afford this committee the chance. It's heady stuff. Like it's, like if you say no, the maximum increase is X percent, that's huge heady stuff, right? And I don't even know it. I just want to make sure everybody would understand the non-starter capability of that and the complexities it could entertain.
Did I hear you say the committee is not going to recommend some of the long-term solutions, like the investing in the industrial park or
No, absolutely not.
considering other?
No, we definitely,
Vendors
so
in town.
I don't know what the committee will recommend, sorry. However, I gave examples of, I think this committee is really focused on the importance of new growth, that we probably may want to change those values and policies that we currently have. And one of those would be either focusing on the industrial park by asking for a project to be completed that issues growth, or do we look at planning and zoning requirements that?
Some of those things be available, because I've heard people, Chris gave a list and people gave lists, could some of those be available for people at some point to give feedback on?
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
I thought you were talking about the covenants part.
It's the same thing. The covenants can list whatever we want. We can say, covenant requires us, we want to make sure if you approve an override that you stand up a committee that explores the industrial park and maximizing its value.
Okay.
That committee has to get together to meet, we can get detailed. We want, as part of this override, a commitment that you explore you hire somebody, making this up, hire somebody to explore zoning bylaw changes such that they are brought in line with the state of Massachusetts code, less restrictive and this. I don't know that. But I'm also thoughtful we should talk to the planning and zoning people.
Yes.
To say like I don't want to say like we're going to do this, we're going to develop everything, and they're like, Tom, you can't. Like,
Right. No, I thought I thought those were going to be a series of recommendations for the town to explore, not part of the covenant.
could be both.
But to be clear, we're gonna pull those together in March.
Yes.
And PACE will take a position on, we think,
Yes.
high level, like pro-growth when it comes to industrial park, infrastructure.
Yes. Hypothetically.
Right, that
we
type
all
of thing.
fall that way. Yes.
You know, absent structural safety issues or a consent decree or something, no debt exclusion. Okay, so, all right, fair enough.
But there's a committee now that's working on what has been done with the master plan, because a lot of that is in the master plan. And so there's a committee already should be looking into those.
They are. Nancy went to a stakeholder meeting with them today. The director of planning and economic development is taking a lead point in that. She and I are in communication. We did meet with the chairs of planning and Concom to start talking about this as well. We do have some things in the pipeline that fit into what we've heard from PACE, right? So the city of Brockton actually ratified an IMA with us Monday night.
They did.
They did, but we've been trying to get for 25 years to get sewer capacity in the industrial park. So that's
Round of applause on that one.
that will also be somewhat challenging because that means we need to start thinking about capital outlays at a pretty tough time, right?
Yes.
We'll get there another night. But we won a grant recently to bring in an outside party to assess our administrative and policy practices as it pertains to permitting so that we can try and get things in and out the door as fast as we can, if they're appropriate, so that people can get building and get to work. So that is the kind of thing that, selfishly, for me, I would like to know where PACE lands on those things. And it sounds like we're saying yes, and we're all probably just very tired.
The town has brought forward a lot of things to taxpayers that have been rejected over time, which they may still want to reject, but does PACE want to take a position on why those are going to be very valuable to creating revenue for the town?
Correct. And, Tom, you brought up other business types or zoning that has been rejected, and that's okay, but reflecting that there's a cost there, and that if the goal is to continue in Easton's legacy of not going for operating overrides regularly, wanting to preserve good services without necessarily going for gold, but good, we all have looked at this an awful lot and feel confident saying that you fundamentally cannot have a anti-growth posture when it comes to private development. There are people who may disagree with me on that, but I want to make sure, I want to know where everyone here lands on that before we're all done.
Yep, we'll have that discussion after the 226 meeting, which brings us to the scheduling. So we have to have a delivery for the select board. Again, I think there's some latitude, but we're looking at the end of March. I would propose we meet on Wednesday, March 5th and Wednesday, March 19th.
We already have the 5th on the calendar.
Thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Love it. We're
Well, we
better
had
than we
it there.
thought.
I
know.
didn't just write it there for, for fun, but.
March 19th. And then at 19th, that's when we finalize what we're going to be presenting to the boards and committees. But that 5th is, like, that's largely it. The 19th is not about debate. Let me set expectations. The 19th is not looking good. I saw a look across the room at you. I sensed it. 19 work for you? No, it doesn't work for you.
I'm actually concerned about the 5th. Yeah, we have a
5th,
negotiation session.
Okay.
It's scheduled to end at 6 p.m., but it would have, 3 of us tied up there if it does go.
Sure. Okay.
But, we're starting now at 6:30, right?
Yep.
So we can stick to the schedule, which
Okay.
happened.
So 5th and 19th, 6:30 start. The 5th is the last really debate. Like, we'll come back and just it might be quick. We're all like, no change, we're good. But the 19th is more, pens have been down. We're looking at a presentation. We're feeling good about our recommendation, last minute tweaks, and how do we continue to get the word out about the future meetings to come and support the process of education?
Are we presenting to the select board then on Monday, the 24th?
They'll let us know.
Oh, okay.
But it's going to be after the 19th. Be prepared.
Okay. Ready to go.
Ready to go.
Yeah,
Probably the
that's one of the regular meetings I would.
Yeah. But we'll let them get back to us.
Okay.
Could be a boatload of one-time liquor licenses needed that day.
This is the priority. I mean, really.
No, I'm
like
with you.
The
I
budget's
was
the
being
priority.
Yeah, no,
facetious,
and
but you
we'll
let
probably
us
have
know.
a second budget change memo by that night too.
Sure.
And just for everyone here, we'll have a budget update on the 24th of the select board. I will, even if you don't go to that, I will make sure I send that to the whole committee so you have it, so you're working with the best information as you walk in on the 26th.
Cool. Anything else?
How long will you need to describe what we're going to be doing at
you
that
met me?
meeting?
I'm the only one that can go toe-to-toe with Connor. You know that.
And also for the Blanche Ames, are we arriving for a 5:30 setup, or did I hear 5:30 was problematic to arrive at that school? Is that okay? Yeah.
It's not problematic for setup, it's just that the childcare is still there and leaving, so it might be traffic and
Okay.
all of that, but
But for us,
this committee,
yeah.
it's fine.
Okay,
Sure.
okay. Very good. So
5:30.
we should plan on that.
Is there a place for us that you prefer for us to park on that night?
Oh, that's a good.
I can check. I'll talk to the police and fire chiefs, so maybe we could all park at Lothrop Street. Take all your parking, Chris,
that's a
and
good
walk
idea.
across the road, so we're not taking the closer spots for folks who might have a hard time walking a distance.
Sure.
The RO parking lot's not a bad spot to park.
That's what I was thinking, that edge,
That's
that
true, I
edge of
always
the
forget
RO
about that.
parking lot.
It's, yeah, there's a walking path between.
Good
those.
idea.
Okay. Sincere thank you to the 8 people that made it online, and genuinely for all of you folks coming
Yes,
today.
thank you for being
It
here.
enriches
Thank
the
you.
discussion. We appreciate the engagement. We implore you to tell your friends, spread the word, and if there is a way that the committee can help you in that endeavor, just let us know. Reach out. One more time, eastonpace2024@gmail.com.
Second.
Done. All those in favor? That's Fulgenetti, Mills. Done. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Remember, your mics are live.